Chapter 1, Introduction. The Power of Self-Binding. A paragraphs. 1 type. Introduction. Content. Welcome then to this exploration of a fascinating and often overlooked corner of economic thought. We have, in previous discussions, touched upon the ideal of the rational actor, the being who weighs costs and benefits with perfect clarity. But tonight, we delve into the intriguing ways in which these seemingly rational actors willingly, even eagerly, tie their own hands. We embark on a journey into the realm of commitment devices, strategies individuals and institutions employ to bind themselves to a course of action, even when future temptations might beckon them astray. Think of it as a form of preemptive self-control, a strategic sacrifice of future flexibility for the sake of present advantage. J. Type. Conceptual. Foundation. Content. At its heart, the concept of commitment devices challenges a foundational assumption of traditional economic models, the unwavering consistency of preferences over time. The classical economist, in his elegant formulations, often assumed that individuals could perfectly predict and consistently pursue their own best interests. But what happens when our future selves have different priorities, or when immediate gratification threatens to derail long-term goals? What if we know, deep down, that we are prone to weakness, to succumbing to momentary desires that undermine our broader objectives? This is where the power of self-binding enters the stage. Defining commitment devices. Content. Commitment devices, then, are essentially mechanisms that reduce or eliminate the ability to deviate from a predetermined course of action. They are tools used to create credible threats and promises, not to others, but to ourselves. Imagine the dieter who throws away all the junk food in their house. This seemingly drastic act is a commitment device, a way of making it significantly harder to indulge in a craving. The cost of indulging has been artificially inflated, thereby strengthening the commitment to the diet. K. Type. Credible threats and promises. Content. These devices operate through the establishment of credible threats and promises. A credible threat is a commitment to inflict a cost on oneself if a certain undesirable action is taken. The promise, on the other hand, is a commitment to reward oneself for adhering to the desired behavior. These threats and promises are only effective if they are credible, meaning that the individual truly believes they will follow through with them. The dieter throwing away the junk food is enacting a credible threat. They are genuinely removing the temptation, making it much harder to backslide. Similarly, a student who promises themselves a relaxing weekend getaway only after completing a major assignment is creating a credible promise. The anticipation of the reward reinforces their commitment to the task at hand. Type. Applications and examples. Content. The applications of commitment devices extend far beyond personal habits. Consider the policymaker attempting to manage inflation. Announcing an inflation target is one thing, but if the public doesn't believe the commitment is genuine, the announcement will have little effect. A central bank might adopt a policy rule, such as a fixed exchange rate or an inflation-targeting regime, to signal a credible commitment to price stability. These rules, though potentially limiting in some circumstances, serve to reassure the public that the central bank is serious about controlling inflation. The credibility of these commitments depends on the institution's past actions and its reputation. Type. The role of incentives. Content. In essence, commitment devices manipulate the incentives we face, making it more attractive to pursue the long-term goal than to succumb to short-term temptation. They act as a form of internal governance, a system of rules and constraints designed to guide our behavior. They acknowledge the inherent tension between our present and future selves, and they provide us with the tools to bridge that gap. They are not a sign of weakness, but rather a recognition of our own fallibility, a strategic adaptation to the complexities of human nature. Type. Transition and open loop. Content. As we delve deeper into the intricacies of this fascinating area, we will explore the various types of commitment devices, their effectiveness in different contexts, and the potential pitfalls that can arise. We've established the foundation. the understanding of commitment devices as tools for creating credible threats and promises, for binding ourselves to a predetermined course. But now, one might ask, what are the specific mechanisms through which these commitments operate? What makes one commitment more credible than another? And what are the external factors that can influence their effectiveness? These are questions we will begin to address in our next consideration of the underlying forces that shape the landscape of commitment. Chapter Title Chapter 2 Classical Economics and the Rational Actor Model. Section Title Commitment Devices in Economics, Credible Threats and Promises, Narrative. Now, as we gently transition from the broad strokes of economic history to more focused theoretical landscapes, it's vital to appreciate the bedrock upon which much of modern economic thought is. This model, a cornerstone of classical economics, assumes individuals act in their own self-interest, making decisions to maximize their utility. But what happens when our rational calculations lead us down paths we later regret? What if our future selves wish we'd acted differently? That's where the fascinating world of commitment devices enters the frame. Paragraphone. Imagine a stream, flowing predictably downhill. This stream represents our initial intentions, our desired future course. The rational actor, at its inception, believes they will continue to navigate this stream with unwavering focus. However, the riverbed is not always smooth. Temptations arise, distractions beckon, and our initial commitment can waver. A commitment device, then, acts as a carefully constructed dam, redirecting or reinforcing the flow of our actions to ensure we reach our intended destination. It's a preemptive strike against our own potential weaknesses. Paragraph 2. These devices manifest in two primary forms: credible threats and credible promises. A credible threat is a prearranged penalty for deviating from a desired course of action. Consider, for example, someone trying to quit smoking. Knowing their willpower might falter, they might make a public declaration, pledging to donate a significant sum of money to a cause they despise if they relapse. The potential humiliation and financial loss serve as a powerful disincentive, making the threat of smoking less appealing, even in moments of intense craving. The key, of course, is that the threat must be credible. It must be believable that the individual will follow through on the penalty, even when the moment arrives. Otherwise, it's simply an empty gesture. Paragraph 3. Conversely, a credible promise offers a prearranged reward for adhering to the intended path. Think of a student struggling to meet a deadline. They might promise themselves a luxurious weekend getaway upon completing their work. The anticipation of the reward provides motivation, offsetting the immediate discomfort of tedious work. The promise gains credibility when it's tied to a tangible action, booking the hotel in advance, for example. By making the reward contingent upon reaching the goal, the promise strengthens resolve and increases the likelihood of success. Paragraph 4. The effectiveness of commitment devices hinges on several factors. Firstly, awareness. The individual must be acutely aware of their own potential for weakness or inconsistency. Secondly, foresight down the line. They must anticipate future temptations or challenges and proactively implement the commitment device. Thirdly, commitment itself. The individual must genuinely believe in the device's power and be willing to adhere to its terms, even when it feels inconvenient or unpleasant. Paragraph 5. From a broader economic perspective, commitment devices play a crucial role in shaping market outcomes. The policymaker, facing a credibility problem in monetary policy, might adopt a fixed exchange rate. This seemingly inflexible mechanism acts as a commitment to maintaining price stability, reassuring investors and preventing inflationary spiral. Similarly, businesses might invest in specialized equipment that is useless for alternative purposes, signaling a long-term commitment to a particular market and deterring competitors. This is because these actions can be interpreted as credible signals of intent, even when explicit promises are absent. Paragraph 6. It's important to note, however, that commitment devices are not without their limitations. They can be inflexible, hindering adaptation to unforeseen circumstances. They can also be costly to implement, and maintain. Furthermore, the very act of employing a commitment device can be seen as a sign of weakness, undermining trust, and potentially provoking unintended consequences. The classical economist, ever mindful of efficiency, would carefully weigh the costs and benefits before resorting to such measures. Paragraph 7. Consider the broader societal implications. Laws and contracts themselves can be viewed as societal commitment devices, designed to promote cooperation and prevent individuals from pursuing short-sighted self-interest at the expense of the collective good. However, these structures are also subject to manipulation and abuse. The challenge lies in designing robust and equitable systems that encourage responsible behavior while preserving individual freedom. Paragraph 8. Thus, we see that the concept of commitment devices transcends the individual and permeates the very fabric of economic and social life. It reflects a fundamental tension between our present desires and our future goals, between the allure of immediate gratification and the pursuit of long-term well-being. As we move into the next phase of our exploration, examining behavioral economics and its challenges to the rational actor model, we must ask ourselves, how deeply does the understanding of human limitations and the devices employed to overcome them alter the very foundations of economic theory? It is a question that will resonate throughout our journey. Mood, analytical, and contemplative. Chapter 3. The Origins of Commitment Theory. Schelling's strategy of conflict, having gently introduced the notion of commitment devices and their curious ability to bind our future selves, let us now trace their intellectual lineage. Our narrative journey brings us to a seminal work that quietly revolutionized the landscape of strategic thinking, Thomas Schelling's The Strategy of Conflict. Published in 1960, it laid the groundwork for much of what we now understand as commitment theory in economics, though its origins are firmly rooted in the study of international relations and, specifically, nuclear deterrence. Before Schelling, game theory, as it was understood, largely focused on scenarios where rational actors sought to maximize their own immediate payoffs. The prevailing model was one of cold calculation, where each player weighed the costs and benefits of every action, choosing the option that yielded the greatest personal advantage. This approach, while mathematically elegant, often failed to capture the complexities of real-world interactions, particularly in situations involving threats and promises. It lacked a certain human element. Schelling observed that effective strategy wasn't simply about overpowering an opponent through brute force or superior logic. Often, it was about skillfully managing expectations, shaping the other player's beliefs about your own future actions. This is where the concept of credible commitments enters the stage. A threat or a promise, to be effective, needs to be believable. It must convince the other player that you will, in fact, carry it out, even if doing so appears to be against your immediate self-interest at the time. This counterintuitive notion is the very heart of the matter. Consider, for example, a scenario where two nations are engaged in a territorial dispute. Nation A threatens to retaliate with military force if Nation B crosses a certain boundary. The effectiveness of this threat depends entirely on Nation B's belief in Nation A's willingness to actually follow through. If Nation B believes that Nation A is bluffing, perhaps because the cost of retaliation is too high, the threat will carry little weight. However, if Nation A can somehow commit itself to retaliating, perhaps by publicly declaring a red line and deploying significant military assets, the threat becomes far more credible. The key insight here is that sometimes, reducing your own freedom of action can actually increase your strategic power. By tying your own hands, by making it more costly or difficult to deviate from a predetermined course, you can influence the other player's behavior in a way that benefits you. This is the essence of a commitment device. It is a self-imposed constraint that alters the incentives facing your future self, thereby shaping the expectations of others. Schelling drew an analogy to the act of burning bridges. By physically destroying the means of retreat, a commander signals to his troops and to the enemy that there is no turning back. This act of apparent self-sabotage, paradoxically, strengthens the commander's position by making his commitment to fight to the finish undeniable. The commitment is not just a declaration, it's a physical, tangible demonstration of result. The policymaker, therefore, must act like a bridge burner from time to time to ensure the outcome he is after. The elegance of Schelling's analysis lies in its recognition that strategy is not simply about maximizing one's own payoff in isolation. It's about understanding the psychology of the other player, anticipating their reactions, and shaping their beliefs through carefully crafted signals and commitments. He reframed conflict as a bargaining process, where threats and promises, credibility and deception, play crucial roles. This conceptual shift had a profound impact on economics, as economists began to recognize the importance of commitment devices in a wide range of situations, from contract enforcement to monetary policy. Schelling's work, of course, was not without its critics. Some argued that it placed too much emphasis on rationality, failing to account for the role of emotions, misperceptions, and irrationality in human behavior. Others questioned the ethical implications of using deception and manipulation as strategic tools. However, its enduring influence on the field of game theory, and subsequently on the development of commitment theory in economics, remains undeniable. As we contemplate the legacy of the strategy of conflict, it leads us to a fundamental question. If commitment devices are so powerful, how can we distinguish between genuine commitments and mere posture? And, perhaps more importantly, how can we build institutions and mechanisms that foster credible commitments, promoting cooperation and stability in a world of uncertainty and self-interest? This question will guide us as we delve deeper into the fascinating world of commitment devices in the chapters ahead. Time inconsistency. The hyperbolic discounting problem. Having considered the inherent assumptions of rational choice and the subtle deviations revealed by behavioral insights, we now turn our attention to a particularly vexing phenomenon: time inconsistency. It's a crack in the foundation of our neatly constructed economic models, a crack that reveals the sometimes turbulent waters of human decision-making across time. The bedrock of classical economics rests on the assumption of exponential discounting. Imagine, if you will, a hypothetical choice: $100 today or $110 in 1 year. The classical economist calmly calculates the present value, applying a constant discount rate to future rewards. If the implied return surpasses their personal rate, they opt for the future reward. Otherwise, they take the immediate gratification. The crucial point is that this preference, once established, remains consistent. Offer the same choice a year later, $100 in a year or $110 in 2 years, and the decision remains the same. The passage of time does not alter the fundamental valuation. But the human experience often tells a different story. We are, it seems, more impatient now than we anticipate being later. This is captured by the concept of hyperbolic discounting. The allure of immediate reward looms disproportionately large compared to rewards in the future, and the further into the future those rewards recede, the more similar in value they become. Think of the dieting individual who, confronted with a tempting dessert after dinner, vows to start their rigorous regime tomorrow. Tomorrow arrives, and the same dilemma unfolds, with the siren song of immediate pleasure once again proving irresistible. This is not irrationality in the sense of flawed logic. It's a systematic bias, a predictable deviation from the expected path. The problem, of course, is that these shifting preferences create a conflict. Our future selves might disapprove of the choices our present selves make. The long-term goals we cherish, financial security, good health, a fulfilling career, can be eroded by the constant temptation of short-term gratification. This conflict between present and future selves is the crux of the time inconsistency problem. So, how can we navigate these turbulent waters? This brings us to the realm of commitment devices. These are mechanisms, tools, and strategies we employ to bind our future selves to our present intentions. They are, in essence, a way to exert control over our own future impulses. Consider the concept of credible threats and promises. A credible threat is a commitment to punish oneself for deviating from a predetermined course of action. A dieter might publicly announce their weight loss goal, making the social cost of failure a powerful deterrent. Similarly, a smoker might hand over their cigarettes to a friend, instructing them to refuse all requests for their return, thus creating a barrier to temptation. Conversely, A credible promise is a commitment to reward oneself for adhering to a desired behavior. Setting up automatic transfers to a savings account each month is a form of credible promise to one's future self. The difficulty lies in making these threats and promises credible. The mere intention to follow through is often insufficient. We need to create structures that make deviation genuinely costly or difficult. Many institutional arrangements can be understood as commitment devices. Social Security, for instance, compels individuals to save for retirement, protecting them from their own short-sightedness. Similarly, pre-commitment contracts, such as Christmas savings clubs, tie our hands, preventing us from accessing funds before a specified date. These are societal-level acknowledgments of our inherent time inconsistency, structures designed to guide us towards our long-term goals. The policymaker, aware of this psychological reality, can utilize these insights to design more effective interventions. Understanding that individuals struggle with delayed gratification allows for the creation of policies that nudge them towards better long-term outcomes. Consider, for example, default options in retirement savings plans. By automatically enrolling employees and requiring them to actively opt out, participation rates dramatically increase, effectively leveraging the power of inertia as a commitment device. Time inconsistency presents a fundamental challenge to traditional economic models. It forces us to acknowledge the complexities of human motivation and the inherent tension between our present desires and our future aspiration. Commitment devices offer a potential solution, a way to bridge the gap between intention and action. But are all commitment devices created equal? And how can we ensure that they are both effective and ethical? This tension between individual autonomy and paternalistic intervention will continue to shape the landscape of behavioral economics. As we move forward, we must grapple with the question of how to design policies that empower individuals to achieve their long-term goals without unduly restricting their freedom of choice. How far can we, or should we, go? Chapter 6. Early Experiments in Commitment. The ultimatum game. Last time, we considered the rather abstract notion of temporal inconsistency, the way our preferences can shift over time, leading us to make decisions we later regret. This inconsistency poses a fundamental problem for rational actors, particularly when long-term goals are at stake. Tonight, we'll move from theory to a fascinating, albeit simplified, experimental arena, the ultimatum game. This game provides a surprisingly clear lens through which to view the power and the fragility of commitment devices. The ultimatum game, at its core, is elegantly simple. Two participants are involved. One, designated the proposer, is given a sum of money, let's imagine it's $100, and instructed to offer a portion of it to the second participant, the responder. The responder then has a binary choice: accept the offer, in which case the money is divided as proposed, or reject the offer, in which case both participants receive nothing. Now, let's put on the hat of the classical economist. From a purely rational, self-interested perspective, the predicted outcome seems obvious. The proposer should offer the smallest possible amount, perhaps a single dollar, and the responder, facing the choice between $1 and nothing, should rationally accept. After all, $1 is better than no dollar. This prediction hinges on the assumption that both players are perfectly rational, utility-maximizing agents, untroubled by emotions like fairness or spite. The predicted allocation, under the cold light of rational self-interest, would be a near-total grab by the proposer. However, empirical reality paints a far more nuanced picture. Across countless iterations of the ultimatum game, in diverse cultures and with varying stake sizes, the results consistently deviate from the starkly rational prediction. Proposers rarely offer the minimum amount. They typically offer between 40% and 50% of the total sum. Even more strikingly, responders frequently reject offers significantly higher than zero, particularly when the offer falls below a certain threshold, often around 20% or 30%. Why this divergence? The explanation lies, at least in part, in the realm of fairness, perceived insult, and the credibility of a threat. The responder, upon receiving a low offer, experiences a negative emotional response. This feeling of unfairness prompts them to weigh the immediate financial loss of rejecting the offer against the psychological satisfaction of punishing the proposer. The rejection then becomes a costly signal, a credible threat demonstrating that unfair behavior will not be tolerated. This is where the idea of commitment enters our discussion. The responder's rejection can be viewed as a pre-commitment device against future exploitation. By establishing a reputation for rejecting unfair offers, the responder discourages future proposers from attempting to exploit them. It's a commitment to a principle, fairness, even at personal cost. It is, in effect, a commitment to a certain type of interaction. Consider the implications for the policymaker. The ultimatum game highlights the limitations of relying solely on models of perfect rationality when designing economic policies. Policies that assume individuals will always act in their narrow self-interest may fail to account for the importance of fairness, social norms, and the potential for individuals to engage in costly punishment to enforce these norms. Designing policies that promote trust and cooperation, that acknowledge the human desire for equity, will likely be more effective in the long run. Furthermore, the ultimatum game sheds light on the dynamics of bargaining and negotiation. It suggests that power imbalances, while initially advantageous, can be constrained by the credible threat of rejection. A proposer with all the initial resources must still consider the potential cost of an offer perceived as unfair. This is a subtle balance, a dance between self-interest and the recognition of social constraints. The proposer's offer becomes a credible promise, a commitment to sharing the benefits of cooperation to avoid a mutually destructive outcome. The ultimatum game, despite its simplicity, serves as a powerful microcosm of the complexities of human interaction. It underscores the critical role that emotions, social norms, and credible commitments play in shaping economic behavior. It provides an early glimpse into the challenges of understanding and predicting behavior in situations where pure rationality is insufficient. As we continue our journey, it begs a lingering question. If even in such a simplified environment, irrational behavior is so prominent, how much more complex will commitment mechanisms become when considering repeated interactions, reputational concerns, and the vast intricacies of real-world economics? Chapter 7. The Role of Reputation in Building Trust. Having explored the initial landscape of commitment devices, those ingenious mechanisms that allow us to bind ourselves to future actions, we now turn to a cornerstone of sustained economic interaction: reputation. Think of reputation as the accumulated sediment of past choices, slowly solidifying into a foundation upon which future trust is built. It is the echo of our actions, reverberating through the marketplace and shaping the perceptions of others. These echoes, of course, are the very stuff of credible threats and promises, the essential building blocks of commitment. Imagine, if you will, a lone merchant in a bustling market. He could, with each transaction, choose to cheat his customers, offering shoddy goods at inflated prices. In the short term, this might yield a higher profit. But consider the long-term consequences. Word will spread, perhaps slowly at first, but inevitably. Potential customers will become wary, choosing to trade with others who have proven more reliable. The merchant's short-sighted gains will be dwarfed by the long-term loss of business. His reputation, once tarnished, becomes a significant economic liability. This simple example illustrates the fundamental principle. A good reputation acts as a powerful commitment device. It provides a strong incentive to honor promises and avoid actions that could damage it. In essence, maintaining a positive reputation becomes an investment, a valuable asset that yields future returns in the form of increased trust and business. The merchant, understanding this, commits himself to honesty and fair dealing, not out of altruism necessarily, but out of a rational calculation of his own long-term self-interest. The allure of instant profit is diminished by the chilling shadow of reputational damage. Conversely, a poor reputation serves as a credible threat, not directed at others, but at oneself. It is the threat of exclusion, of lost opportunities, of economic isolation. Knowing that one's actions will be scrutinized and remembered provides a potent disincentive for opportunistic behavior. The threat of tarnishing one's name becomes a self-imposed constraint, guiding actions toward more cooperative and trustworthy paths. Now, consider the complexities that arise when we move beyond the simple dyadic relationship of merchant and customer. In larger, more anonymous markets, the transmission of information becomes more challenging. The effectiveness of reputation as a commitment device depends heavily on the efficiency of information flow. Imagine a scenario where a firm repeatedly violates its contracts. If this information remains confined to a small circle of directly affected parties, its impact will be limited. However, if this information is widely disseminated, perhaps through online reviews or industry publications, the firm's reputation will suffer, and its ability to conduct business will be significantly impaired. This highlights the importance of institutions that facilitate the collection and dissemination of information about trustworthiness. Credit rating agencies, consumer protection organizations, and even online review platforms play a crucial role in shaping reputations and enforcing accountability. These institutions act as conduits, channeling the flow of information and amplifying the consequences of both good and bad behavior. They essentially lower the cost of acquiring information about a firm's or individual's past behavior, making it easier for others to assess their trustworthiness. The policymaker often faces the challenge of designing regulations that leverage the power of reputation. Transparency requirements, for example, can make it easier to monitor and evaluate the behavior of firms and individuals. Mandatory disclosure rules can force companies to reveal information about their environmental impact, labor practices, or financial performance, thereby subjecting them to greater public scrutiny. Similarly, laws protecting whistleblowers can encourage individuals to report unethical or illegal behavior, further enhancing accountability. Reputation also plays a crucial role in fostering cooperation in repeated games. In these scenarios, individuals interact with each other over extended periods, allowing them to learn about each other's behavior and adjust their strategies accordingly. The classical economist understood that if individuals value their future interactions, they are more likely to cooperate, even if it means forgoing short-term gains. This is because the threat of reputational damage, of being labeled as untrustworthy, can outweigh the temptation to cheat. The concept of tit for tat, where one cooperates initially and then mirrors the other's previous move, elegantly illustrates this principle. It rewards cooperation and punishes defection, creating a powerful incentive for sustained trust. But consider this: even the most meticulously crafted reputation can be shattered by a single egregious act. This fragility is both a strength and a weakness. It keeps individuals and firms on their toes, constantly striving to maintain their good standing. But it also creates the potential for disproportionate punishment, where a minor transgression can lead to severe reputational damage. Is there a way to design systems that are both robust and fair, that effectively deter wrongdoing, while also allowing for redemption? This question perhaps leads us to the next phase in our exploration: the intricacies of repeated interactions and the evolution of trust over time. Chapter 8: Game Theory and the Prisoner's Dilemma. Cooperation versus defection. Last time, we explored the subtle dance of supply and demand, the ever-shifting equilibrium. Tonight, we delve deeper into the fascinating world of strategic interaction, a world painted by the brush of game theory. Specifically, we will focus on the prisoner's dilemma and its implications for cooperation, defection, and the surprisingly powerful role of commitment devices. The prisoner's dilemma, as many of you may recall, presents a simple yet profound scenario. Two individuals, suspected of a crime, are apprehended and interrogated separately. Each has the choice to cooperate, remain silent, or defect, betray the other. The outcome, however, depends not just on their individual choices, but on the choice made by their counterpart. If both cooperate, they receive a moderate sentence. If both defect, they receive a harsher one. But here's the crux: if one defects while the other cooperates, the defector goes free, while the cooperator receives a very severe penalty. The inherent logic of this situation, devoid of any communication or trust, often leads to a suboptimal outcome. Each individual, acting in their own perceived self-interest, is rationally compelled to defect. This is because, regardless of what the other person does, defecting always yields a better outcome, or at least avoids the worst possible outcome. But when both choose to defect, they both end up worse off than if they had cooperated. This is the essence of the dilemma. Individual rationality leading to collective irrationality. This simple game mirrors countless real-world situations, from international arms races to environmental pollution. Each nation, each company, each individual is faced with the choice of cooperation or defection. And all too often, the siren call of self-interest drowns out the potential benefits of collective action. However, the prisoner's dilemma offers a glimmer of hope, a way out of this seemingly inescapable trap. The power of commitment. Commitment devices are mechanisms that allow an individual or entity to credibly bind themselves to a particular course of action, even if, in the heat of the moment, they might be tempted to deviate. These devices transform the game, shifting the incentives and making cooperation more attractive. Think of them as self-imposed constraints that shape future behavior. Consider the concept of credible threats. A credible threat is a promise to inflict punishment if the other party deviates from the agreed-upon cooperative path. But the key word here is credible. The threat must be believable, meaning the one making the threat must have a genuine incentive to carry it out, even if it's costly. This is often achieved by tying the threat to something valuable, something that would be lost if the threat were not followed through. A pre-commitment to retaliate, publicized and unwavering, can deter defection and foster cooperation. Similarly, credible promises offer a path to cooperation. These are assurances that specific benefits will be conferred upon the other party if they uphold their end of the bargain. The same principle of credibility applies here. The promise must be backed by a tangible incentive to fulfill it, even when doing so might be inconvenient. Binding contracts, reputation building, and the establishment of trust through repeated interactions are all examples of how credible promises can be forged. Imagine, for instance, a government seeking to attract foreign investment. Merely stating that investment is welcome is insufficient. The policymaker must credibly commit to protecting investor rights, providing a stable regulatory environment, and ensuring the repatriation of profits. This commitment can be achieved through legally binding agreements, transparent governance, and a track record of honoring its promises. Without such commitment, investors, fearing expropriation or arbitrary policy changes, will rationally choose to invest elsewhere. Commitment devices, therefore, act as stabilizers in the often turbulent waters of strategic interaction. They allow us to navigate the prisoner's dilemma and move toward more cooperative and mutually beneficial outcomes. They highlight the importance of foresight, strategic thinking, and the willingness to accept short-term constraints in exchange for long-term gains. They remind us that rationality is not always about maximizing immediate self-interest, but about understanding the interconnectedness of choices and the power of credible commitment. As we prepare to move beyond the realm of individual and strategic decision-making and into the broader landscape of macroeconomic forces, a question lingers. How do these principles of cooperation and commitment scale up to the complex interactions of entire economies? How can nations, institutions, and individuals collectively commit to policies that promote long-term stability and prosperity? That, my friends, is a puzzle for another night. Commitment devices as solutions to coordination problems. We've previously considered how individuals, acting in their own self-interest, can sometimes inadvertently produce suboptimal outcomes for the group as a whole. This tension, this inherent friction between individual rationality and collective well-being, often manifests as coordination problems. Tonight, we explore how commitment devices, credible threats, and promises can serve as unexpected bridges across these chasms, allowing for the synchronization of actions toward a mutually beneficial equilibrium. Imagine, if you will, a scenario familiar to game theorists, the classic prisoner's dilemma. Two individuals facing the same choice find themselves trapped in a suboptimal equilibrium because neither can trust the other to cooperate. Each rationally chooses to defect, leading to a worse outcome for both than if they had both chosen to cooperate. The core issue is a lack of credible commitment. They can say they will cooperate, but without a binding mechanism, such pronouncements are mere whispers in the wind. A commitment device, in essence, is a tool that allows an individual to credibly bind themselves to a particular course of action, even when that action might seem disadvantageous in the short term. It's a way to alter the incentive structure, to make defection less appealing and cooperation more rewarding. This is often achieved by making defection costly, by imposing a penalty that is triggered automatically if the commitment is broken. The crucial element is that the commitment must be credible. It's not enough to simply declare an intention. The promise or threat must be backed by something tangible, something that cannot be easily revoked. Consider, for example, a firm that promises to match a competitor's price. This promise, without a concrete mechanism to enforce it, is easily dismissed as mere advertising. However, if the firm were to establish a policy that automatically refunds the difference to any customer who finds a lower price elsewhere, it has created a credible commitment. The potential cost of violating the promise, the refunds paid out, makes the commitment much more believable. This, in turn, can influence the behavior of competitors, potentially leading to a more stable pricing environment. These devices also play a crucial role in international relations. Treaties, for instance, are commitment devices that seek to bind nations to certain behaviors. However, the effectiveness of a treaty depends on the enforcement mechanisms. A treaty with strong enforcement provisions, perhaps involving economic sanctions for violations, is far more credible than one that relies solely on goodwill. The credibility, and hence the effectiveness, waxes and wanes with the strength of the enforcement. Think also about the policymaker trying to manage inflation. Simply announcing a target inflation rate is unlikely to be effective if individuals do not believe that the policymaker is truly committed to achieving that target. To establish credibility, the policymaker might adopt a policy rule, such as targeting a specific level of money supply growth, that makes it more difficult, and therefore less tempting, to deviate from the announced target. This self-imposed constraint acts as a commitment device, signaling to the market the policymaker's resolve. However, commitment devices are not without their limitations. They can be inflexible, making it difficult to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. The classical economist would argue that strict adherence to a commitment, even in the face of changing conditions, could lead to suboptimal outcomes. Furthermore, the effectiveness of a commitment device depends critically on its visibility and verifiability. If it's difficult to monitor whether the commitment is being honored, or if there's ambiguity about what constitutes a violation, the commitment will lose its credibility. The use of commitment devices represents a fascinating interplay between individual agency and strategic interaction. They are tools that allow us to shape the landscape of incentives, to nudge behavior in a more desirable direction. They help us navigate the complexities of coordination problems, turning potential conflicts into opportunities for mutual gain. But are these commitments truly unbreakable? Or are there subtle ways in which even the most seemingly binding promises can be circumvented, undermined by the ever-present forces of self-interest? We'll consider such frailties in our next exploration. Chapter 10. Pre-commitment strategies. Tying one's hands. We've explored how individuals and institutions make decisions, often navigating uncertainty with imperfect information. Now, let's consider a fascinating, and sometimes counterintuitive, aspect of decision-making: the strategic limitation of one's own options. This realm belongs to pre-commitment strategies, where we deliberately tie our hands to achieve a desired outcome. The allure of pre-commitment lies in its ability to create credible threats and promises. Think of it as erecting a dam to channel the river of future choices. Alone, we might be tempted by immediate gratification or swayed by short-term pressures. But a commitment device, carefully constructed, alters the landscape of incentives, making certain choices more likely and others less so. The aim is to shape behavior over time, even when future selves might harbor different desires. Consider the individual trying to quit smoking. They understand, intellectually, the long-term benefits of abstaining. Yet, the immediate craving can overwhelm this understanding. One pre-commitment strategy might be to publicly announce their intention to quit, perhaps even wagering money on their success. By increasing the social cost of failure, they make relapse less appealing. The key here is credibility. The threat of social embarrassment or the loss of money must be substantial enough to outweigh the immediate gratification of a cigarette. It's a subtle calibration of incentives, a deliberate alteration of the decision landscape. This principle extends far beyond individual choices. In the realm of public policy, commitment devices play a crucial role in ensuring credibility. The policymaker, tasked with maintaining price stability, might adopt an inflation target. By publicly committing to this target and granting independence to the central bank, the policymaker effectively ties their hands. This signals to the market that they are serious about fighting inflation, which, in turn, helps to manage expectations and actually reduce inflationary pressures. The commitment must be believable. Otherwise, the market will simply ignore the announcement, rendering the strategy ineffective. The classical economist recognized the importance of rules-based policies as a way to constrain discretionary power. The idea is that a clear, transparent rule, consistently applied, provides more predictability and fosters greater trust than ad hoc interventions. The commitment to a rule, such as balanced budget amendment, may limit flexibility in responding to unforeseen events, but it also reduces the temptation for short-sighted policies that could have negative long-term consequences. The trade-off between flexibility and credibility is a central theme in the design of effective commitment devices. However, these strategies are not without their potential pitfalls. Overly rigid commitments can be detrimental, particularly in the face of unexpected shocks. The inflexible rule might become a constraint rather than an asset. Furthermore, the effectiveness of a commitment device depends on its enforceability. If there are loopholes or escape clauses, the commitment may lack credibility. It's like building a dam with weak foundations. It may appear strong at first, but it could collapse under pressure. Therefore, the successful application of pre-commitment strategies requires careful consideration of the context, the specific incentives at play, and the potential for unintended consequences. It's about understanding the dynamics of self-control and the importance of building credible institutions that can withstand the test of time. The best commitment devices are those that are both robust and adaptable, providing a framework for consistent decision-making without stifling the ability to respond to changing circumstances. Consider, for instance, international trade agreements. These agreements can be seen as commitment devices that prevent countries from engaging in protectionist measures. By signing a treaty, a country commits to free trade principles and limits its ability to impose tariffs or other trade barriers. This commitment benefits both the country itself and its trading partners by promoting efficiency and fostering economic growth. But even these agreements can be undermined by loopholes or by a lack of enforcement mechanisms. As we navigate this complex landscape of choices and commitments, a question lingers. How do we balance the benefits of pre-commitment with the need for flexibility in an ever-changing world? This will be the river flowing into our next exploration, the dynamic adjustments we make as new information and circumstances arise, the ebb and flow of policy in response to the tides of change. What happens when the river erodes the dam? Building credibility. Signals and screening. Good evening. Tonight, we turn our attention to a central pillar of economic interaction: credibility. In a world where information is imperfectly shared, where one party possesses knowledge that another lacks, the ability to convey trustworthiness becomes paramount. We will explore the mechanisms of signals and screening, and how these relate to the potent tools of commitment devices, credible threats and promises. Imagine a flowing river. Information asymmetry acts as a dam, obstructing the smooth passage of transactions. Signals and screening are, in essence, attempts to bore tunnels through that dam, allowing some flow to resume. A signal is a deliberate action taken by the informed party to credibly convey their private information to the uninformed party. Think of it as a beacon shone across a misty landscape, guiding others towards a truth they cannot directly perceive. The effectiveness of a signal hinges on its cost. A truly informative signal must be more costly for those who do not possess the desirable characteristic to mimic than for those who do. Consider the case of education. A prospective employee obtaining a university degree signals their competence and work ethic to potential employers. The signal is credible because it's more expensive for less capable individuals to obtain the same degree. They would likely fail the coursework or find the effort disproportionately taxing. The cost, therefore, serves as a barrier, preventing widespread imitation and preserving the signal's value. Screening, on the other hand, is the reverse. It's an action taken by the uninformed party to elicit information from the informed party. Instead of sending a beacon, they lay a trap, designed to differentiate between types. Consider an insurance company offering a range of policies with varying deductibles. Individuals who perceive themselves as high risk are more likely to choose policies with lower deductibles and higher premiums, while those who believe they are low risk will opt for higher deductibles and lower premiums. The insurance company, by offering this menu of choices, screens its customer base, separating them according to their risk profiles. Now, let us consider the concept of commitment devices, the cornerstone of credible threats and promises. A commitment device is a mechanism that allows an individual or institution to voluntarily restrict their future options, making a particular course of action more believable. These devices operate on the principle that restricting one's own freedom can enhance one's credibility. Take, for instance, the classical economist negotiating with a labor union. They might threaten to shut down the factory if wage demands are too high. But such a threat is only credible if the economist can demonstrate a genuine willingness to follow through, even if it's painful. One way to achieve this is by making irreversible investments specific to a lower wage environment. This might involve adopting technologies that reduce labor costs, thereby signaling that the factory is less dependent on the union's cooperation. Similarly, the policymaker might promise to maintain low inflation. To make this promise credible, they might support the establishment of an independent central bank with a clear mandate to prioritize price stability. By relinquishing direct control over monetary policy, the policymaker signals a commitment to low inflation that transcends short-term political considerations. The key to a successful commitment device lies in making the alternative action, the broken promise or the failed threat, demonstrably more costly than the intended action. It's about altering the incentive structure, creating a situation where deviating from the commitment becomes self-defeating. Think of it as building a bridge and then deliberately destroying the boats that carried the materials, making retreat impossible. Commitment devices are not always straightforward. They can be subtle, requiring careful design and implementation. They can also be costly, both in terms of resources and flexibility. But in a world characterized by imperfect information and strategic interaction, they represent a vital tool for building trust and achieving desired outcomes. The art of building credibility, then, lies in understanding the interplay between signals, screening, and commitment devices. It's about strategically shaping the information landscape and creating the conditions necessary for trust to flourish. This delicate dance, this constant calibration of incentives, is at the heart of so many economic interactions, from the simplest transaction to the most complex international treaty. And it highlights the critical question: how do we design institutions that foster and reward credible behavior, ensuring that promises made are promises kept? What deeper mechanisms must be constructed to support these fleeting moments of trust? That, perhaps, is a question for our next exploration. The St. Petersburg paradox and risk aversion, drifting now into the realm of commitment devices, those ingenious architectures we construct to bind our future selves. Before we delve, recall how the St. Petersburg paradox exposed the limitations of expected monetary value as a sole guide to decision-making. People, it seems, don't simply chase the highest payout. They are wary of risk. And this inherent aversion to uncertainty sets the stage for our exploration of commitment. Imagine a vast reservoir representing our potential future actions. This reservoir is fed by streams of desires, impulses, and temptations. We, as rational actors, ideally want to channel this reservoir towards optimal outcomes. However, these streams are turbulent, prone to overflow and deviation. Commitment devices are, in essence, dams and canals we construct to manage this flow, ensuring it irrigates the fields we intend, rather than flooding the valleys of regret. At the heart of commitment lies the concept of credibility. A threat is only effective if it's believable. A promise only valuable if it's expected to be kept. Consider the procrastinator, perpetually vowing to start a task tomorrow. Their future self, however, is just as susceptible to procrastination. Their promise, therefore lacks credibility. To overcome this, they might employ a commitment device, perhaps a prearranged penalty for failing to meet a deadline, paid to a friend. This transforms a mere intention into a credible threat against their future self's tendency to delay. Commitment devices manifest in diverse forms. The saver might set up automatic transfers to a retirement account, making it more difficult to succumb to immediate spending temptations. The dietitian might publicly announce their weight loss goals, leveraging social pressure to reinforce their commitment. These are all strategies designed to restrict future options, paradoxically increasing overall well-being. But commitment is not simply about restricting choice. It's about altering incentives. A credible threat, for instance, changes the payoff structure of a future decision. The policymaker, wishing to deter a specific behavior, might impose a steep fine. The effectiveness of this fine hinges not just on its size, but also on the likelihood of enforcement. A large fine that is rarely applied is less credible than a smaller fine consistently enforced. Consider also the notion of reputation. Repeated interactions create a history, and this history shapes expectations. The firm, known for consistently delivering on its promises, builds a reputation for reliability. This reputation becomes a valuable asset, influencing future transactions. Breaching a commitment, therefore, carries a cost beyond the immediate loss. It erodes trust and jeopardizes future opportunities. This dynamic interplay between reputation and credibility underpins much of economic activity. However, commitment devices are not without their limitations. Overly rigid commitments can be inflexible in the face of unforeseen circumstances. The entrepreneur who commits to a particular business strategy, regardless of market changes, risks failure. The ideal commitment device strikes a balance between rigidity and flexibility, providing sufficient structure to guide behavior without stifling adaptation. The art of commitment, then, lies in understanding the subtle interplay between incentives, expectations, and the ever-present tug-of-war between our present and future selves. It's a delicate dance, a calibration of promises and threats, designed to navigate the complexities of human decision-making. We see echoes of this even in international relations. Consider the Dynamati, the nation that makes treaty agreements with other nations, to create a system of credible commitment to mutual defense or free trade. These commitments, like all commitments, work to shape behavior in a cooperative direction. And so, as we prepare to move forward, let us consider this. How might we design commitment devices to address systemic challenges, such as climate change or inequality, where individual actions have collective consequences? Chapter 13. Contract Theory. Formalizing Commitments. Yes. We spoke last time of information, asymmetries, and the delicate dance they force upon us. Now let us turn our attention to a related, yet distinct, concept: the art of commitment. For often, simply having information is insufficient. We must also convince others that we will act upon it in a predictable manner. This is where contract theory and its understanding of credible threats and promises becomes invaluable. Think of commitment as the cornerstone of trust, the very mortar that binds economic relationships. Without it, transactions falter, cooperation collapses, and the potential for mutual gain withers. But commitment is not merely a matter of willpower. It requires mechanisms, structures, even contracts that render our intentions believable. Let us consider the foundational concept of a commitment device. Imagine a scenario where an individual wants to behave in a certain way, perhaps to save more money or to resist an immediate temptation, but struggles with self-control. A commitment device is a prearranged constraint, voluntarily imposed, that makes it more difficult, or even impossible, to deviate from the desired course of action. Think of it as Odysseus, binding himself to the mast to resist the siren's song. He knew he would be tempted, so he proactively limited his future options. In the realm of economics, commitment devices manifest in various forms. Consider a farmer entering into a futures contract. He agrees to sell his crops at a predetermined price at a future date. This is a commitment device because it removes his ability to profit from a sudden surge in market prices. He's locked in. But crucially, it also protects him from a catastrophic price collapse. The contract therefore serves as a credible signal of his intention to supply, even if external circumstances change. Now, let's delve into the realm of credible threats and promises. A threat is a statement of intention to inflict harm if a certain condition is met. A promise is a statement of intention to confer benefit if a certain condition is met. But both are only effective if they are credible. Credibility, in turn, hinges on incentives. A threat is credible if the party issuing it has a strong incentive to carry it out, even if doing so is personally costly. Similarly, a promise is credible if the party making it has a strong incentive to keep it, even if circumstances change. The policymaker, for instance, might announce a policy of strict inflation targeting, threatening to raise interest rates aggressively if inflation exceeds a certain level. The credibility of this threat depends on several factors: the reputation of the policymaker, the independence of the central bank, and the legal and political constraints that limit their ability to deviate from the announced policy. If markets believe that the policymaker is likely to cave under political pressure and prioritize short-term growth over long-term price stability, the threat will lack credibility, and inflation expectations will remain elevated. Conversely, a firm might promise a lifetime warranty on its product. The credibility of this promise depends on the firm's financial stability, its reputation for quality, and the legal enforceability of the warranty. If consumers believe that the firm is likely to go bankrupt or renege on its obligations, the promise will be worthless. Contract theory formalizes these ideas, providing a framework for analyzing the design of contracts that can effectively incentivize desired behavior. It recognizes that individuals are self-interested and will respond to incentives, and it seeks to create contracts that align the interests of all parties involved. The classical economist would, perhaps, see this as the invisible hand meticulously crafting the architecture of trust. But the world is rarely so tidy. Information is never perfect, enforcement is never costless, and unforeseen contingencies always arise. Therefore, contracts are often incomplete, leaving room for discretion and interpretation. This, of course, introduces new challenges and complexities. How do we design contracts that are robust to unforeseen events? How do we ensure that discretionary power is used responsibly? How do we build relationships based on trust and reciprocity that can supplement, or even substitute for, formal contracts? These are questions that will continue to preoccupy us as we navigate the ever-evolving landscape of economic interaction. And as we move into the next phase, we will find ourselves pondering the role of reputation in enforcing agreements and the dynamics of long-term relationships. How do reputations truly cement themselves within an economy? Chapter 14. Self-control problems and addiction. The need for restraint. We've navigated the intriguing landscape of behavioral biases, understanding how our minds often stray from the perfectly rational path assumed by traditional economic models. Now, let us descend from the broad view and focus on a particularly challenging consequence of these biases: the struggle with self-control, most acutely felt in the realm of addiction. Imagine a flowing river, representing our desires. Sometimes, this river flows smoothly, its current guided by our long-term goals. We envision a future self, healthy, prosperous, and content. But at other times, the river swells, fed by impulsive urges and immediate gratification. This surge threatens to overwhelm our carefully constructed dams of reason, flooding our present and eroding the foundations of our future. This, in essence, is the internal conflict at the heart of self-control problems. Traditional economics, often embodied by what we might call the classical economist, assumes that individuals consistently maximize their utility. This model posits a stable preference ordering. What we want today, we'll likely want tomorrow, and our decisions reflect a coherent long-term plan. However, the reality of addiction, and even more mundane struggles with overeating or procrastination, starkly contradicts this assumption. Our preferences shift, our willpower weakens, and we find ourselves acting against our own best interests. This is known as time-inconsistent preferences. Consider the allure of a cigarette. The immediate pleasure, the temporary relief from stress, outweighs, in that fleeting moment, the long-term health risks. This is the river swelling, the impulse overwhelming the rational plan. Later, when the craving subsides, the future self regrets the decision, lamenting the compromise of long-term well-being. This cyclical pattern, this battle between present and future selves, lies at the core of addiction and related self-control failures. To combat this internal conflict, individuals often resort to what economists call commitment devices. These are prearranged mechanisms designed to restrict future choices, effectively tying one's own hands to prevent impulsive behavior. Think of it as building stronger, more resilient dams along the river of desire. A classic example is the alarm clock. We set it the night before, knowing that our sleepy, less rational morning self might be tempted to succumb to the allure of extra sleep. The alarm forces us to act according to our earlier, more rational plan. Similarly, joining a gym with a hefty cancellation fee acts as a commitment device, incentivizing us to attend even when motivation wanes. This can also be viewed as creating credible threats and promises. If we don't go to the gym, we pay the penalty. If we do go, we see the long-term benefits. Commitment devices can take many forms, from public pledges to formal contracts. The key is that they introduce a cost, either financial or psychological, to deviating from the desired course of action. This cost, when faced with a temptation, can tip the balance in favor of the long-term goal. They represent a recognition that our own future selves are not always to be trusted, that our willpower is a finite resource easily depleted. The policymaker, aware of these self-control challenges, can also employ commitment devices on a larger scale. Taxes on cigarettes and alcohol, for example, serve as a form of commitment device for the population as a whole, discouraging impulsive consumption. Similarly, opt-out retirement savings plans, where employees are automatically enrolled but can choose to withdraw, capitalize on inertia and encourage long-term savings. However, the effectiveness of commitment devices is not absolute. Some individuals may be able to circumvent them, finding loopholes or simply enduring the imposed cost. Moreover, reliance on external restraints can potentially weaken internal willpower, creating a dependence on external mechanisms rather than fostering self-discipline. The challenge, then, lies in finding the right balance, employing commitment devices strategically to support, but not supplant, individual responsibility. Ultimately, the economic understanding of self-control problems and addiction highlights the complex interplay between rationality and impulsivity. It acknowledges that human behavior is not always driven by a consistent pursuit of utility, and that strategies to promote well-being must account for the inherent challenges of self-regulation. We've seen that commitment devices can be powerful tools, but their effectiveness is contingent upon understanding individual preferences, psychological biases, and the broader social context. But how can we reconcile the microeconomic understanding of individual behavior with the macroeconomic implications of widespread self-control failures? This, perhaps, would be a question for our next discussion. Chapter 15. Commitment in Personal Finance. Saving and investment. Last time, we considered the psychological biases that often derail our best-laid financial plans. But acknowledging these tendencies is only half the battle. The true art lies in constructing systems that preempt these biases, guiding us toward our long-term goals despite our inherent fallibility. Tonight, we delve into a powerful tool for achieving this: commitment devices. Commitment, in its essence, is about restricting future choices. It's a deliberate self-imposition designed to align our present actions with our future intentions. Consider the ancient mariners, who, upon hearing the siren's alluring song, bound themselves to the mast. This was a commitment device, a self-imposed constraint preventing them from succumbing to temptation and steering their ship toward destruction. In personal finance, we employ similar strategies, albeit often in less dramatic fashion. At its core, a commitment device hinges on the interplay of credible threats and promises. A credible threat is a future penalty that we inflict upon ourselves for deviating from our chosen path. A credible promise, conversely, is a future reward contingent on adhering to that path. The strength of a commitment device rests on the credibility, the likelihood of these threats and promises being realized. Let us explore a practical illustration. Consider the individual who struggles to save for retirement. Recognizing this weakness, they might choose to enroll in a retirement plan with automatic deductions from their paycheck. This is a commitment device. The threat is the loss of potential immediate spending by deferring income into the retirement account. The promises is the future financial security afforded by a growing nest egg. The credibility of this device stems from the fact that the deductions are automatic and perhaps difficult to reverse without incurring some sort of inconvenience or fee. Now, contemplate the difference between a simple New Year's resolution to save more and the establishment of this automatic savings plan. The resolution, absent any concrete mechanism for enforcement, lacks credibility. It's easily broken, a whispered promise, lost in the clamor of daily life. The automatic savings plan, however, represents a far more robust commitment. It leverages inertia, making it easier to continue saving than to stop. Another example can be seen in the realm of debt repayment. An individual with a tendency to overspend might choose to consolidate their debts into a single loan with a fixed interest rate and a strict repayment schedule. The threat is the potential for late fees and damage to their credit score if they fail to make timely payments. The promises is the eventual freedom from debt and the associated financial peace of mind. Again, the credibility lies in the concrete consequences of non-compliance. It's crucial to understand that the effectiveness of a commitment device is directly proportional to the perceived cost of breaking the commitment. The higher the cost, the more credible the threat, and the more likely the individual is to adhere to their chosen course. This cost can be monetary, social, or psychological. For instance, publicly announcing a savings goal can create a social cost to failure, as the individual would then face the potential embarrassment of not meeting their self-imposed target. The classical economist might argue that commitment devices are unnecessary, that rational individuals should always be capable of making optimal decisions. However, as we've seen, human behavior is rarely perfectly rational. We are prone to impulsivity, procrastination, and a host of other biases that can undermine our long-term interests. Commitment devices serve as a corrective mechanism, a way to nudge ourselves toward better outcomes. The policymaker also recognizes the power of commitment devices. Policies like automatic enrollment in retirement plans, with the option to opt out, leverage this principle to encourage greater savings rate. Similarly, programs that incentivize healthy behaviors, such as smoking cessation or weight loss, often incorporate elements of commitment, requiring participants to put something at stake to increase their chances of success. Ultimately, the key to successful financial planning lies not merely in setting goals, but in constructing systems that make those goals attainable. Commitment devices are a powerful tool in this endeavor, allowing us to harness our own weaknesses and turn them into strengths. They represent a deliberate attempt to shape our future selves, ensuring that we are guided by our long-term aspirations, rather than swayed by fleeting desires. As we conclude, consider this. How might the concept of commitment extend beyond individual actions and shape broader financial systems? What are the ethical considerations surrounding the use of commitment devices, especially when applied to vulnerable populations? These are questions to ponder as we move forward, navigating the intricate landscape of behavioral economics and personal finance. Until next time. Chapter 16. The use of penalties and rewards to enforce commitments. Having considered the subtle dance of informational asymmetry and the ways individuals attempt to signal their true intentions, we now turn to a more direct, sometimes even blunt, instrument, the use of penalties and rewards to enforce commitments. This, in essence, is the realm of credible threats and promises, the heart of what economists term commitment devices. Imagine, if you will, a delicate balance. On one side, we have the allure of short-term gain, the temptation to deviate from a previously agreed-upon course. On the other, the long-term benefits of cooperation, the sustained prosperity that comes from honoring our word. Commitment devices are mechanisms designed to tip this balance, to make defection less appealing and adherence more attractive. Consider the simple case of a penalty. A farmer, weary of the fluctuating market prices, enters into a contract to sell his harvest at a predetermined rate. Should he attempt to sell his crops elsewhere, he faces a significant financial penalty. This penalty serves as a commitment device. It increases the cost of breaking the contract, thereby making it more likely he will uphold his original agreement. The severity of the penalty must be carefully calibrated, of course. Too lenient, and it loses its deterrent effect. Too harsh, and no one will agree to the contract in the first place. The use of rewards, though seemingly gentler, operates on the same fundamental principle. A company, seeking to incentivize its employees, offers a bonus for reaching certain performance targets. This bonus is a reward, a positive inducement to align the employee's actions with the company's goals. It makes fulfilling the commitment, achieving the targets, more desirable than shirking responsibility. The effectiveness of such a reward hinges on its perceived value. It must be substantial enough to outweigh the potential effort and discomfort involved in meeting the targets. These penalties and rewards can take myriad forms. They can be monetary, as in the case of fines and bonuses. They can be reputational, where failing to honor a commitment damages one's standing in the community. Or they can be social, involving ostracism or disapproval from one's peers. The specific form will depend on the context and the nature of the commitment being enforced. Now, let's consider a slightly more complex scenario. The policymaker, attempting to address a persistent environmental problem, introduces a carbon tax. This tax is essentially a penalty levied on activities that generate carbon emissions. It increases the cost of polluting, thereby encouraging businesses and individuals to adopt more sustainable practices. The effectiveness of the carbon tax hinges on several factors, including the level of the tax, the availability of alternative technologies, and the overall economic climate. If the tax is too low, it will have little impact on behavior. If it is too high, it could stifle economic growth. Striking the right balance is crucial. The classical economist, observing these mechanisms, might point out the potential for unintended consequences. Penalties and rewards, while often effective, can also distort incentives and lead to unforeseen outcomes. For example, a stringent penalty for late project delivery could incentivize employees to cut corners, compromising the quality of the final product. A generous reward for sales volume could encourage aggressive and unethical selling tactics. The design of effective commitment devices requires careful consideration of these potential pitfalls. Furthermore, the credibility of the threat or promise is paramount. A threat that is not believable will have no deterrent effect. A promise that is not credible will be met with skepticism. Building credibility often requires establishing a track record of honoring commitments, even when it is costly to do so. It also requires demonstrating the capacity and willingness to enforce the penalty or deliver the reward. The flow of economic activity, much like a river, carves a path shaped by the forces acting upon it. Commitment devices, in the form of penalties and rewards, are but one such force, guiding the flow, channeling behavior towards desired outcomes. Yet, the riverbed is complex, the currents ever-shifting. Understanding these forces and their potential interactions is essential for navigating the economic landscape. But what happens when these commitment devices become too entrenched? When the pursuit of measurable outcomes overshadows intrinsic motivation? That, perhaps, is a question best explored in our next discourse. Ulysses Contracts. Planning for future weakness. Welcome back, students. Tonight, we delve into a fascinating corner of economic thought. Commitment devices. It's a concept rooted in the ancient tale of Ulysses, or Odysseus, as some know him, and his perilous journey past the Sirens. Their enchanting songs promised irresistible pleasure, but also guaranteed shipwreck. Ulysses, aware of his future weakness, instructed his crew to bind him to the mast, ears plugged with wax, preventing him from succumbing to their deadly allure. This, in essence, is the genesis of the Ulysses contract. Economically speaking, a Ulysses contract is a pre-commitment strategy. It's a deliberate action taken now to restrict one's future choices, preventing a future self from making decisions that the present self knows are suboptimal. Think of it as building a dam against a future flood of temptation. The flood is not inherently bad, but it needs to be contained. Why would anyone willingly limit their future freedom? Because we recognize that our preferences, our willpower, and even our rationality can fluctuate. We are not the perfectly consistent economic agents sometimes portrayed in textbooks. The present self, imbued with foresight, can anticipate these weaknesses and design safeguards. The simplest example might be a Christmas Club savings account. The present self, perhaps prone to impulsive spending, agrees to deposit funds regularly, with the restriction that withdrawals are penalized or even impossible, until a specific date, Christmas. This isn't about lacking information. It's about lacking self-control. The desire for immediate gratification often outweighs the long-term benefits of saving, leading to regret. The Christmas Club account acts as the mast to which we bind our future impulsive selves. Now, let's consider this concept on a larger scale. The policymaker often faces situations where long-term economic stability requires unpopular short-term sacrifices. Austerity measures, designed to reduce national debt, are a prime example. These measures, while beneficial in the long run, can lead to immediate hardship, making them politically unpalatable. A Ulysses contract, in this context, might involve the creation of an independent central bank shielded from political pressure. The central bank, mandated to maintain price stability, can then implement policies, such as raising interest rates, even if those policies are unpopular, because it is bound by its pre-commitment to its mandate. The institution itself becomes the mast, resisting the siren song of short-term political expediency. Credible threats and promises are crucial elements of commitment devices. A threat only works if it is believable. It must be costly for the threatener not to carry it out. Similarly, a promise is only valuable if it is credible. There must be a mechanism in place that makes it difficult for the promiser to renege. The independent central bank's credibility stems from its legal mandate and its operational autonomy. Breaking that commitment would damage its reputation and undermine its future effectiveness, creating a significant cost to reneging. Consider the challenge of combating climate change. International agreements on carbon emissions are, in essence, attempts at Ulysses contracts. Each nation, recognizing the long-term dangers of unchecked emissions, agrees to limit its output. However, the immediate costs of reducing emissions, reduced economic growth, job losses in certain sectors, can create a temptation to cheat. The success of these agreements depends on the credibility of the commitment mechanisms, monitoring, enforcement, and the reputational consequences of non-compliance. If countries believe they can violate the agreement without significant penalty, the entire system unravels. Furthermore, it's important to acknowledge that Ulysses contracts are not always perfect. They can be rigid and inflexible, preventing adaptation to unforeseen circumstances. A contract designed to prevent one type of suboptimal behavior might inadvertently create opportunities for another. The classical economist might argue that the very act of limiting freedom is, in itself, a suboptimal outcome. However, the crucial point remains: we are not always rational actors. Recognizing our inherent weaknesses and designing mechanisms to mitigate their impact is a vital aspect of effective economic planning and policy making. So we see Ulysses contracts operating at individual, institutional, and even international levels. They are tools for navigating the complexities of human behavior and aligning present actions with future goals. Chapter 18. Behavioral Economics. Challenging rationality assumptions. We've journeyed through models of rational choice, haven't we? Maps of idealized agents, maximizing utility with unwavering precision. But life, as we know, is rarely so calibrated. We stumble, we procrastinate, we yield to impulses. And this brings us to the fascinating territory where behavioral economics dares to tread: the fallibility of perfect rationality, and more specifically, the strategies we employ, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously, to navigate our own imperfections. Tonight, we explore a particularly intriguing aspect of this challenge: commitment devices. These are tools, essentially, that individuals use to restrict their own future choices. Think of them as the economic equivalent of Ulysses, binding himself to the mast to resist the siren's song. The classical economist might scoff, deeming such actions unnecessary. A truly rational being would simply choose to resist temptation. Yet, the very existence and prevalence of commitment devices reveal a deeper truth. We often anticipate our own future irrationality and proactively seek to mitigate its effects. Consider the concept of credible threats and promises. These are the building blocks upon which many commitment devices are built. A credible threat is a commitment to take an action that is detrimental to oneself if another party deviates from an agreed-upon behavior. The credibility is key. It's not enough to merely say you will act. The threat must be believable, meaning it must be in your own self-interest to carry it out, or at least appear so. This credibility is often achieved by binding yourself to a course of action in advance, making it costly or impossible to deviate later. Imagine a policymaker attempting to curb inflation. Announcing an intention to raise interest rates might not be enough to convince the market. The market might suspect that when the time comes, the policymaker will buckle under political pressure and refrain from acting. To make the threat credible, the policymaker might need to delegate monetary policy to an independent central bank, a body insulated from short-term political considerations. This delegation serves as a commitment device, signaling a willingness to endure the short-term pain of higher interest rates to achieve long-term price stability. Conversely, a credible promise is a commitment to take an action that benefits another party if they adhere to an agreed-upon behavior. Again, credibility is paramount. A promise is only as good as the likelihood that it will be kept. Reputation, repeat interactions, and legally binding contracts all serve to bolster the credibility of promises. These are the foundations upon which trust is built. And trust, of course, is the lubricant that allows economic exchange to flow smoothly. A company, for instance, might offer a product warranty as a credible promise. The warranty assures consumers that the company stands behind its product and will bear the cost of repairs or replacements if the product fails. This promise is credible because the company has a vested interest in maintaining its reputation for quality and reliability. If the warranty were routinely ignored, the company's reputation would suffer, leading to a decline in sales. The beauty of commitment devices lies in their ability to reshape incentives. They transform situations where impulsive, short-sighted behavior might prevail into environments where long-term goals are more likely to be achieved. A smoker who enrolls in a program where they deposit a significant sum of money, forfeiting it if they fail a nicotine test, is using a commitment device to overcome the immediate gratification of a cigarette. The penalty, the loss of the deposit, makes it more costly to succumb to temptation. However, commitment devices are not without their limitations. They can be inflexible, difficult to unwind, and sometimes carry unintended consequences. The policymaker, who delegates monetary policy, for example, might find that the independent central bank is less responsive to the needs of the electorate. The smoker might find the program too restrictive and abandon it altogether, feeling even more discouraged than before. The key, then, is to design commitment devices that are both effective and adaptable, striking a balance between rigidity and flexibility. Ultimately, the study of commitment devices forces us to confront the nuanced reality of human behavior. It acknowledges that we are not always perfectly rational actors, and that we often need external mechanisms to help us align our actions with our intentions. This understanding, in turn, allows us to design more effective policies, create more trustworthy institutions, and ultimately, to lead more fulfilling lives. As we consider these self-imposed constraints, this conscious wrestling with our future selves, one begins to wonder, are these commitment devices merely patches on a flawed system, or are they hinting at a deeper, more fundamental shift in how we understand human agency and economic choice? What inherent biases, beyond the temptations we bind ourselves against, might be subtly steering the ship of our decisions? And how might we, as architects of our own economic lives, learn to navigate these unseen currents? Perhaps that is where our exploration will take us next. Chapter 19: Nudges and Choice Architecture. influencing decisions. Having explored the intriguing deviations from perfect rationality, the inherent biases that subtly color our choices, we now turn our attention to how these very biases can be harnessed, shaped, and even anticipated. We move from the internal landscape of the individual mind to the external structures that frame our decisions, a realm often described as choice architecture. Think of it as designing the landscape of decision-making, carefully placing signposts and pathways to gently guide individuals toward outcomes that align with their own long-term interests, even when those interests are at odds with immediate impulses. The heart of this gentle guidance lies in the concept of nudges. A nudge is any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. It is not a mandate, it is a suggestion, a subtle push in a particular direction. Consider the placement of healthy food options at eye level in a cafeteria, or the automatic enrollment of employees in a retirement savings plan with the option to opt out. These are nudges, carefully constructed to leverage our inherent tendencies towards inertia and ease. Now, within this landscape of nudges lies the more profound and fascinating terrain of commitment devices. These are tools we employ ourselves, or have imposed upon us, to constrain our future selves, to bind ourselves to a course of action that our present selves deem optimal, even if our future selves might be tempted to stray. Commitment devices rest on the interplay between credible threats and promises. Imagine the procrastinator. Knowing their propensity to postpone important tasks, they might implement a self-imposed deadline with a prearranged penalty for failure. Perhaps they donate money to a cause they vehemently oppose if they fail to meet the deadline. This is a credible threat, made potent by the knowledge that the pain of the penalty outweighs the momentary pleasure of procrastination. The threat is credible because it is prearranged, automated, and difficult to circumvent in the heat of the moment. The procrastinator recognizes the inherent conflict between their immediate desires and their long-term goals, and leverages the power of pre-commitment to bridge the gap. Conversely, consider the aspiring saver. They might commit to automatically transferring a portion of each paycheck to a savings account that is difficult to access. This is a credible promise to their future self. The promise is that, by limiting their immediate access to funds, they are ensuring their future financial security. The commitment lies in the inertia of the system. The automatic transfer reduces the likelihood of impulsive spending and reinforces the desired behavior. The promise is credible because the automatic system is difficult, though not impossible, to dismantle. The power of commitment devices lies in their ability to exploit our understanding of our own weaknesses. The classical economist, assuming perfect rationality, would scoff at the need for such mechanisms. They would argue that a perfectly rational individual would always act in their own best interest, without the need for external constraints. However, we know that we are not perfectly rational. We are susceptible to temptation, prone to procrastination, and easily swayed by immediate gratification. Commitment devices provide a framework for navigating these inherent frailties. The policymaker, armed with an understanding of behavioral economics, can leverage commitment devices to promote social welfare. Consider a program that encourages individuals to commit to specific weight loss goals, with financial incentives for success, or a system that automatically enrolls students in tutoring programs if their grades fall below a certain threshold. These are examples of how commitment devices can be integrated into policy to promote desirable outcomes. The effectiveness of commitment devices, however, hinges on several factors. The commitment must be credible, the penalty or reward must be meaningful, and the individual must be aware of their own susceptibility to temptation. Furthermore, ethical considerations must be paramount. Nudges and commitment devices should not be used to manipulate individuals or to restrict their freedom of choice unduly. The goal is to empower individuals to make better decisions for themselves, not to coerce them into adopting predetermined outcomes. As we consider the architecture of choice, we must remember that it is a constantly evolving landscape. New biases are uncovered, new technologies emerge, and our understanding of human behavior deepens. The challenge lies in adapting our strategies to this ever-changing context, ensuring that our interventions are effective, ethical, and ultimately, empowering. But as we design these intricate systems of influence, one nagging question persists. How far can we, and indeed should we, go in shaping the choices of others? What are the limits of paternalism, and how do we balance the desire to promote well-being with the fundamental principles of autonomy and freedom? As we move toward the realm of advanced behavioral interventions, these questions become ever more pressing and demand our careful consideration in the chapters that follow. Chapter 20. The role of emotions in commitment, body, paragraph, content. Having explored the rational architecture of commitment devices, those structures we erect to bind our future selves to present intentions, we now turn to a more nebulous element. While the logic of credible threats and promises often rests on cold, calculated self-interest, the engine that truly drives their effectiveness often burns self. A solemn vow made before witnesses, perhaps even inscribed in law. The classical economist might see it as a simple contractual agreement, enforceable through penalties. Yet, the weight of the pledge extends far beyond the threat of legal repercussions. It taps into something deeper, the emotional cost of breaking one's word. The shame, the guilt, the erosion of self-respect, these are powerful deterrents, often far more potent than fines or imprisonment. Geotype, paragraph, content, emotions, then, act as internal commitment devices, supplementing and often amplifying the external structures we create. Imagine a dieter struggling to resist a tempting dessert. A rational commitment device might involve pre-ordering only healthy meals or avoiding grocery stores altogether. But the true bulwark against temptation may be the fear of self-disgust, the disappointment in one's own lack of willpower. This negative emotion, internalized and powerfully felt, reinforces the commitment to dietary goals. It acts as a self-imposed sanction, a far more intimate and immediate punishment than any external consequence could provide. Type, paragraph, content. Conversely, positive emotions can also play a crucial role. The anticipation of pride, the satisfaction achieving a long-sought goal, the joy of honoring a commitment, these act as motivational forces, driving us towards fulfilling our promises. Think of the entrepreneur toiling tirelessly to launch a new venture. The rational calculation of potential profits is undoubtedly a factor, but it is often overshadowed by the emotional investment, the burning desire to see their vision realized, the pride in creating something new and valuable. This emotional fuel sustains them through setbacks and challenges, reinforcing their commitment even when rational analysis might suggest otherwise. Type, paragraph, content. The policymaker, understanding this interplay between reason and emotion, can design more effective commitment strategies. Consider policies aimed at encouraging responsible savings behavior. Simply providing financial incentives may not be enough. Tapping into the emotional desire for future security, painting a vivid picture of a comfortable retirement, can be far more persuasive. Similarly, policies aimed at reducing pollution might be more effective if they appeal to people's sense of civic pride and environmental responsibility, rather than relying solely on punitive measures. Type, paragraph, content. However, we must acknowledge the darker side of emotional commitment. Emotions can be manipulated, exploited, and weaponized. The unscrupulous salesperson preys on our fears and insecurities to close a deal. The demagogue inflames our anger and resentment to gain power. Understanding the mechanisms by which emotions influence commitment is therefore crucial for protecting ourselves from manipulation and exploitation. It requires a constant vigilance, a critical awareness of the emotional undercurrents that shape our decisions. Type, paragraph, content. Furthermore, the very intensity of emotional commitment can lead to irrational behavior. The sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to persist in a failing endeavor because of the emotional investment already made, is a prime example. We cling to losing ventures not because they are rationally justified, but because we are emotionally attached to them, unable to admit defeat. This highlights the importance of balancing emotional commitment with rational analysis, of maintaining a degree of objectivity, even in the face of strong feelings. Type, paragraph, content. Therefore, emotions are not simply irrational impulses to be suppressed. They are powerful forces that shape our commitments, both for good and for ill. Understanding their role is essential for designing effective commitment devices, for making sound decisions, and for navigating the complex landscape of human behavior. They are, in essence, the invisible hand guiding, and sometimes misguiding, our economic choices. They are a necessary addition to our equations, even if they resist precise quantification. A type, paragraph, content. As we come to the close of this chapter, let us turn our minds to one final question. How do social norms, those unwritten rules that govern our interactions, interact with both rational commitment devices and the emotional drivers we've discussed? The interplay between these forces likely shapes markets in ways we have only begun to understand. But that, as they say, is a question for another night's contemplation. Choki mood, relaxed, contemplative, and analytical. Dian. Social norms and moral constraints. We've navigated the turbulent waters of individual rationality, observing how self-interest, when channeled correctly, can power markets and generate wealth. But the human experience is rarely purely rational. It is colored by emotions, shaped by social pressures, and bounded by self-imposed limitations. Tonight, we gently turn our attention to these internal and external governors, specifically how they manifest as commitment devices, credible threats and promises that guide our actions, and sometimes even improve our economic outcomes. Consider the simple act of saving for retirement. The classical economist might assume we diligently calculate present discounted values and invest accordingly. Yet, most of us struggle. We are easily swayed by immediate gratification, by the allure of the present. This is where commitment devices enter the stage. A pre-commitment to automatically deduct a portion of our salary into a retirement account is a prime example. We willingly restrict our future freedom, knowing that doing so serves our long-term interests. This isn't irrationality, but rather a sophisticated understanding of our own potential for weakness, a preemptive strike against our future selves. These devices operate on the principle of creating a credible threat or promise. The threat is the potential pain, the cost, associated with deviation from the chosen path. The promise is the reward, the benefit awaiting at the end. The credibility is crucial. A threat without teeth, a promise without a foundation, is merely empty air. Think of a smoker who announces to friends that they are quitting. The potential shame of public failure serves as a commitment device, a threat to their social standing that reinforces their resolve. It's not simply the act of quitting that matters, but the declaration, the public vow that elevates the stakes. Social norms themselves often function as powerful commitment devices. Consider the taboo against breaking a promise. In economic terms, a broken promise might offer short-term gains. But the social cost, the erosion of trust, the damage to reputation, far outweighs the immediate benefit. These moral constraints, ingrained through years of social conditioning, act as a brake on purely self-interested behavior, fostering cooperation and stability. The perceived value of maintaining a positive social image, of adhering to the rules of the game, provides the necessary credibility to the promise of ethical behavior. Effective commitment devices aren't always consciously designed. They often emerge organically, shaped by cultural evolution and the accumulation of shared experiences. The policymaker, keen to nudge society toward desirable outcomes, must understand this delicate interplay between individual incentives and social constraints. A policy that clashes with deeply ingrained social norms is likely to face resistance, to be undermined by the very forces it seeks to harness. Subtlety, understanding, and a deep appreciation for the existing social architecture are key. One cannot simply impose commitment devices from above. One must cultivate an environment where they can flourish from within. The beauty and the challenge of commitment devices lies in their variability. What works for one individual or one society may not work for another. The strength of social norms, the efficacy of moral constraints, differs across cultures and across time. Understanding these nuances requires a careful and nuanced approach, a willingness to see beyond the surface of rational calculation, to appreciate the subtle power of human psychology and social interaction. Thus, we see that commitment devices are not merely economic tools, but rather reflections of our deepest values, our shared beliefs, and our inherent capacity for both self-deception and self-improvement. They represent a fascinating intersection between individual agency and social influence, a testament to the intricate dance between reason and emotion. As we prepare to move forward, one question lingers. How do these commitment devices evolve and adapt in the face of rapid technological change? How are social norms shaped and reshaped by the digital landscape? The answer, as always, lies in careful observation, rigorous analysis, and a willingness to embrace the complexities of the human experience. Commitment in relationships, love and trust. We've explored the dance of incentives and disincentives, the subtle pushes and pulls that shape our choices. Now, let us turn our attention to a higher level of engagement, a realm where rational actors seek to bind themselves, paradoxically, to a particular course of action, commitment. And where better to examine this than within the intricate architecture of relationships, built upon the cornerstones of love and trust. In economics, we often speak of commitment devices, mechanisms that allow individuals to pre-commit to a certain behavior, even when future incentives might tempt them to deviate. These devices operate through the power of credible threats and promises. A threat is credible only if it is in the threatener's best interest to carry it out, should the threatened action occur. A promise is credible if fulfilling it aligns with the promiser's incentives, or if the cost of breaking it outweighs the potential benefits. In essence, these are ways to solve time inconsistency problems, where what seems optimal now differs from what will seem optimal later. Consider the analogy of a couple embarking on a long-term partnership. Their initial declaration of love, that profound and often bewildering emotion, can be interpreted, in part, as a promise, a commitment to mutual support, fidelity, and shared growth. However, the future is a landscape of shifting desires and unforeseen challenges. What prevents this initial promise from dissolving under the pressure of changing circumstances? One answer lies in the creation of credible threats. These are not threats in the colloquial sense of malice, but rather consequences deliberately constructed to deter either partner from breaking the foundational promise. For example, societal condemnation of infidelity, legal contracts formalizing shared assets and responsibilities, or even the more subtle, but equally potent, threat of emotional heartbreak and the dissolution of a shared life. These act as barriers, increasing the cost of defection and thereby bolstering the initial commitment. However, threats alone are insufficient. A relationship built solely on the fear of negative consequences is a brittle edifice, prone to collapse under the slightest tremor. The real strength lies in credible promises. These are actions and behaviors that consistently demonstrate the commitment to the partnership, reinforcing trust and mutual benefit. Consider acts of selfless support during times of hardship, the consistent prioritization of the partner's needs, or the unwavering dedication to shared goals. These are tangible demonstrations of the initial promise, proof that the commitment is not merely a hollow declaration, but a living, breathing reality. The effectiveness of both credible threats and credible promises rests on reputation. In the context of a relationship, reputation is the accumulated history of interactions, the sum total of actions and words that build or erode trust. A partner who consistently delivers on promises, who demonstrates unwavering loyalty and support, builds a strong reputation for reliability. This, in turn, increases the credibility of future promises and strengthens the bond of commitment. Conversely, a partner who is prone to broken promises, who prioritizes self-interest above the shared good, damages their reputation and weakens the foundations of trust. The classical economist might argue that reputation is simply an investment, a series of choices designed to maximize future returns. In the long run, consistent trustworthiness pays dividends. The parallel to economic systems is striking. The policymaker, seeking to foster a stable and prosperous economy, relies on both credible threats and credible promises. Just as a strong reputation for trustworthiness encourages investment and economic growth, so too does it foster stability and trust within a relationship. Moreover, the concept of sunk costs plays a crucial role. Sunk costs are investments that cannot be recovered, and they can act as a powerful commitment device. In a relationship, these sunk costs might include shared investments in a home, children, or even simply years spent building a life together. The greater the sunk costs, the higher the barrier to exit, and the stronger the incentive to maintain the commitment. Ultimately, commitment in relationships, like commitment in economics, is a delicate balance between self-interest and mutual benefit, between the fear of consequences and the hope of reward. It is a continuous negotiation, a constant reaffirmation of the initial promise, and a testament to the power of human connection. And like any complex system, it is subject to unforeseen shocks and unexpected disruptions. Which leads us to wonder, what happens when these shocks threaten not just individual relationships, but the entire economic landscape? And how do individuals and systems adapt when the very basis of commitment itself is called into question? That, perhaps, is a matter for our next exploration. Chapter 23: The Impact of Technology on Commitment Devices. Good evening. Tonight, we turn our attention to a phenomenon rapidly altering the landscape of commitment: technology. Consider, for a moment, the elegant simplicity of a locked diary, a classic, low-tech commitment device aimed at preserving privacy. Now contrast that with the labyrinthine security protocols protecting digital information in the age of cloud computing. The principle remains the same: to restrict access, to bind ourselves to a predetermined course of action. But the mechanics, and therefore the vulnerabilities, have profoundly shifted. Technology, in its essence, is a force multiplier. It amplifies existing capabilities, both for good and for ill. When applied to commitment devices, this means that technology can create incredibly robust and reliable systems of self-control. Imagine, for example, a smart contract program to automatically transfer funds to a savings account each payday, with no possibility of early withdrawal. The rigidity, the pre-programmed inevitability, offers a level of commitment previously unattainable. This fosters a sense of security and predictability in an uncertain world. However, this amplification works in the other direction as well. Technology can also erode the effectiveness of commitment devices, creating new avenues for circumvention and exploitation. Consider the ease with which digital passwords can be cracked, or the sophisticated techniques used to bypass security protocols on online betting platforms. What once seemed like an unbreakable commitment can become fragile and permeable under the relentless pressure of technological advancement. This creates a sense of unease and fragility in the modern economic landscape. The impact of technology on credible threats and promises, the cornerstones of commitment, is particularly noteworthy. In the realm of business, sophisticated monitoring systems can now track employee performance with unprecedented accuracy. This allows managers to make credible threats, or offer credible promises, based on real-time data, fostering a more transparent and accountable environment. However, this increased surveillance also raises ethical concerns about privacy and autonomy, highlighting the delicate balance between control and freedom. The policymaker, grappling with these complex dynamics, faces a significant challenge: how to harness the power of technology to strengthen commitment devices, while simultaneously mitigating the risks of circumvention and abuse. The answer, it seems, lies in a multifaceted approach that combines technological innovation with robust legal frameworks and ethical guidelines. The regulation of cryptocurrencies, for instance, necessitates a careful balancing act between fostering innovation and protecting consumers from fraud and manipulation. Consider also the rise of behavioral economics and its intersection with technology. We now have the ability to design digital environments that subtly nudge individuals toward more desirable behaviors. Gamification, for example, can be used to incentivize healthy habits or encourage responsible financial planning. May. These choice architectures, as they are often called, represent a powerful form of commitment device, but they also raise questions about the limits of individual autonomy and the potential for manipulation. It is a constant calibration, a delicate balancing of forces. The classical economist, observing these trends, might argue that the market will ultimately sort things out. The most effective commitment devices will naturally rise to the top, while the flawed ones will fade away. However, this optimistic view ignores the potential for market failures, such as information asymmetry and network effects, which can distort the competitive landscape and allow inferior commitment devices to persist. Furthermore, the ethical implications of technology-driven commitment devices often extend beyond the realm of pure economic efficiency, requiring a more nuanced and socially conscious approach. The flow of technological innovation is relentless. Each new advance brings with it both opportunities and challenges for commitment devices. As we develop more sophisticated forms of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can expect even more profound transformations in the way we make commitments and hold ourselves accountable. The very nature of trust, a fundamental element of commitment, may be reshaped by algorithms and data-driven systems. Ultimately, the impact of technology on commitment devices is a story of constant adaptation and reevaluation. We must strive to understand the underlying dynamics at play, to anticipate the potential pitfalls, and to harness the power of technology for the common good. This requires a collaborative effort involving economists, policymakers, technologists, and ethicists, all working together to shape a future where commitment remains a cornerstone of a stable and prosperous society. Chapter 24. Social Media and Public Commitments. Last time, we explored the fascinating intricacies of behavioral economics, highlighting how our rational self often battles our impulsive desires. Today, we turn our attention to a closely related concept: commitment devices. And what better stage to observe these devices than the very public arena of social media? Commitment devices, in their essence, are mechanisms that help us overcome our own weaknesses. They are tools we employ to bind ourselves to a course of action, preventing us from succumbing to temptations or succumbing to procrastination. Think of them as self-imposed constraints designed to achieve a long-term goal. In the realm of economics, these commitments manifest as credible threats and promises. A credible threat is a promise to inflict a cost upon oneself if a certain condition is met. A credible promise, conversely, is a guarantee of a reward contingent upon a specific action. The key word here is credible. The commitment must be believable, potent enough to influence behavior. Consider, for example, the classical economist advocating for fiscal responsibility. They might publicly announce a detailed plan to reduce government debt over a set period. This pronouncement serves as a commitment. The economist's reputation, their future influence, becomes inextricably linked to the plan's success. Failure to deliver would damage their standing, a significant cost indeed. The public pronouncement transforms the desired outcome, fiscal responsibility, from a mere preference to a matter of personal and professional integrity. The threat of reputational damage is designed to make the commitment credible. Now, let us shift our focus to the digital landscape. Social media, with its pervasive reach and instantaneous feedback loops, has dramatically altered the dynamics of public commitment. Platforms like Twitter or Facebook serve as colossal town squares where individuals and organizations constantly announce their intentions, their goals, and their promises. This creates a powerful form of social accountability. Imagine the policymaker announcing a new initiative to combat climate change on social media. The announcement is met with both support and scrutiny. Every step taken, every policy implemented, is subject to public commentary and critique. The policymaker's words are etched in digital stone, retrievable and referable at any moment. This constant surveillance, this perpetual record, enhances the credibility of the commitment. The cost of reneging, public disapproval, lost votes, damage to their legacy, becomes acutely visible. However, this new transparency is a double-edged sword. The ease with which commitments can be made also makes them easier to break, or at least easier to subtly alter. The sheer volume of information competing for our attention can dilute the impact of any single promise. The policymaker might find that the initial enthusiasm for their climate initiative wanes over time, overshadowed by newer concerns. The public's attention, like a restless stream, shifts its course. Furthermore, the performance of commitment devices is intimately connected to the trust extended by the audience. If the public generally distrusts the policymaker, their pronouncements, however grand, will carry little weight. The promise in this case lacks credibility. Conversely, a leader who has consistently demonstrated integrity and competence will find that their commitments are taken more seriously. The interplay between social media and public commitments also introduces a fascinating element of social signaling. Individuals and organizations often make public commitments, not only to achieve a specific goal, but also to signal their values, their identities, and their affiliations. Announcing support for a particular charity, for instance, not only benefits the charity, but also signals one's compassion and social responsibility to their network. Consider the entrepreneur publicly pledging to donate a portion of their company's profits to environmental conservation. This act not only provides valuable funding for environmental causes, but it also serves as a powerful signal to consumers, employees, and investors. It signals that the entrepreneur and their company are committed to sustainability, potentially attracting customers who share those values and boosting employee morale. The commitment, in this case, serves a dual purpose. It contributes to a worthwhile cause and strengthens the company's brand. As we navigate this complex interplay of public pronouncements, social scrutiny, and personal integrity, we must ask ourselves, are social media platforms truly effective tools for fostering credible commitments, or are they merely arenas for performative virtue signaling? Does the instant feedback loop amplify accountability, or does it simply encourage short-term thinking and fleeting promises? The answer, I suspect, lies somewhere in the delicate balance between these forces. It is in carefully calibrating the incentives to ensure that public commitments are not just words whispered into the digital wind, but rather potent forces shaping our actions and our collective future. But how does this landscape of social commitment then impact the stability of larger economic systems? Can these promises build or erode trust in global markets? AI and algorithmic commitment, promises and perils. Having explored the evolving landscape of information asymmetry, we now turn our attention to the power and potential pitfalls of commitment. In classical economic thought, commitment, particularly in the form of credible threats and promises, is the cornerstone of strategic interaction. It's about tying one's hands, willingly relinquishing freedom of action to achieve a more desirable outcome. Think of it as preemptive self-control, a way to navigate the turbulent waters of human incentives. But what happens when we introduce artificially intelligent agents into this equation? Can algorithms truly commit, and if so, what are the implications for economic stability and individual autonomy? Consider the classic example of a central bank attempting to control inflation. The policymaker understands that a credible commitment to low inflation, even if it means enduring short-term economic pain, is crucial for long-term stability. The problem, historically, has been time inconsistency. The temptation to stimulate the economy before an election or to alleviate immediate unemployment often outweighs the long-term benefits of price stability. This is where algorithmic commitment enters the stage. Imagine an AI meticulously trained on economic data and tasked with executing monetary policy. This AI, impervious to political pressure and short-term temptations, is programmed to adhere strictly to a predefined inflation target. Its actions are transparent, its code auditable. The promise of unwavering commitment is built directly into its architecture. The perceived benefit is obvious: a more stable, predictable economic environment, free from the vagaries of human decision-making. However, the path to algorithmic commitment is fraught with peril. Firstly, consider the design phase. Who decides the algorithm's objectives? Who determines the specific rules it will follow? If the AI is programmed to maximize a particular metric, say GDP growth, it might inadvertently neglect other crucial aspects of societal well-being, such as income inequality or environmental sustainability. The biases and preferences of the programmers, whether conscious or unconscious, become embedded in the very fabric of the algorithm, shaping its actions and influencing economic outcomes in ways that may be difficult to foresee or control. Furthermore, there's the question of adaptability. The economic landscape is constantly evolving, subject to unexpected shocks and unforeseen circumstances. An AI rigidly bound by predefined rules might be unable to respond effectively to novel situations. The classical economist understood that rules were necessary, but also knew that markets are always seeking the most efficient solutions. A human policymaker, with their capacity for judgment and intuition, can adapt and improvise in ways that an algorithm, however sophisticated, might struggle to replicate. The issue of accountability also looms large. If an AI-driven system makes a mistake, who is responsible? Is it the programmers who designed the algorithm? Is it the institutions that deployed it? Or is it simply an unavoidable consequence of entrusting complex decisions to machines? The lack of clear lines of accountability can erode public trust and create a climate of uncertainty and fear. Moreover, the very act of creating a seemingly unbreakable commitment device can, paradoxically, create new opportunities for strategic manipulation. Knowing that an AI is bound by a specific set of rules, economic agents might attempt to game the system, exploiting its rigidities to their own advantage. This could lead to unintended consequences and undermine the overall effectiveness of the commitment device. The allure of algorithmic commitment is undeniable. The promise of stability, predictability, and efficiency is deeply appealing. However, we must proceed with caution, carefully considering the potential risks and unintended consequences. The integration of AI into economic decision-making is not simply a matter of technological innovation. It's a fundamental shift in the balance of power, with profound implications for individual autonomy and societal well-being. The human element, with its capacity for flexibility, empathy, and ethical judgment, cannot be entirely replaced by algorithms, no matter how sophisticated. The optimal approach, perhaps, lies in finding a balance between algorithmic precision and human oversight, a synergy that leverages the strengths of both while mitigating their respective weaknesses. As we navigate this intricate interplay between artificial intelligence and economic commitment, one question lingers. What new forms of coordination and collaboration will emerge in an economy increasingly shaped by autonomous agents? That, perhaps, will be the subject of our next exploration. Decentralized autonomous organizations as commitment mechanisms. We've previously explored the evolution of trust in economic systems, the subtle dances between actors striving for cooperation. Now, let's delve into a fascinating contemporary manifestation of that quest: decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. These entities, born from the blockchain revolution, offer a novel approach to the age-old problem of commitment in economic interactions. Commitment, in its purest form, is the ability to credibly bind oneself to a future course of action. This ability is essential for building trust and facilitating long-term collaborations. Consider, for instance, a business negotiation. If one party can convincingly demonstrate a commitment to fulfilling their promises, perhaps by investing significant resources up front, or by accepting severe penalties for non-compliance, then the other party is more likely to engage in good faith. The crux of the matter lies in the word credibly. Empty promises are easily broken, leaving only disappointment and shattered partnerships. The value of commitment hinges on its enforceability. Traditionally, this enforcement has relied on institutions like legal contracts, reputational concerns, and the threat of external intervention. But these mechanisms are often imperfect, costly, and susceptible to manipulation. DAOs, in their essence, attempt to encode commitment directly into their operating code. They are, in effect, digitally enshrined sets of rules governing how resources are allocated and decisions are made. These rules, once deployed on a blockchain, are largely immutable and transparent. The beauty lies in their programmatic enforcement. No single individual can unilaterally alter the DAO's core functions, and all transactions are recorded publicly, creating an auditable trail of activity. To understand the power of this approach, let's consider a few examples. Imagine a DAO designed to fund open-source software development. The DAO's rules might stipulate that funds are released to developers only upon the achievement of specific milestones, verified by a decentralized network of validators. This removes the reliance on a central funder who might be tempted to withhold payments arbitrarily, thereby increasing the developer's assurance of receiving compensation. The DAO, in this context, acts as a commitment device, ensuring fair compensation for contributions. Another illustrative example is a DAO, governing a supply chain. By encoding the terms of a contract into smart contracts managed by the DAO, participants can be assured that payments will be triggered automatically upon verification of delivery, eliminating the need for costly and time-consuming legal processes. The promise of prompt and reliable payment, guaranteed by code, enhances trust and efficiency throughout the supply chain. However, it's crucial to acknowledge that DAOs are not without their limitations. While their code-based enforcement offers a powerful form of commitment, it also introduces new challenges. A poorly designed DAO can be vulnerable to exploits, either through coding errors or unforeseen loopholes. Furthermore, the rigidity of code can make it difficult to adapt to changing circumstances. The classical economist might point out the importance of flexibility to market changes and the inherent rigidity of pre-programmed conditions. The policymaker might express concern about the potential for DAOs to be used for illicit activities, given their decentralized and anonymous nature. Ensuring regulatory oversight while preserving the innovative potential of DAOs remains a delicate balancing act. Despite these challenges, DAOs represent a significant step forward in our ability to create credible commitment mechanisms. They offer a tantalizing glimpse into a future where economic interactions are governed by transparent, automated rules, reducing the need for intermediaries and enhancing trust among participants. They push the boundaries of contract theory, moving us closer to a world where a commitment is not just a promise, but a provable fact. They represent a potential rebalancing of power dynamics. However, one can't help but wonder, as we move towards increasingly autonomous systems, how do we ensure that these systems align with our human values? What role will human judgment play in a world increasingly shaped by code? Perhaps that's a question for our next session. Smart contracts and blockchain technology, verifiable promises. Good evening. We ended our previous contemplation on the subtle power of information asymmetries. Tonight, we shift our focus to an equally fascinating realm: the challenge of credible commitment and how technology, specifically smart contracts and blockchain, offers potential solutions. Think of it as moving from a landscape obscured by fog to one where the contours of agreements are etched in immutable stone. In the world of economics, trust is a fragile commodity. We often encounter situations where individuals or entities would like to make credible promises, assurances that they will adhere to a particular course of action. However, the very nature of human behavior, the potential for opportunism, for reneging on commitments when circumstances change, casts a shadow of doubt. This risk of non-compliance, can stifle economic activity, prevent efficient transactions, and even lead to the breakdown of entire markets. Consider, for instance, a simple loan. A borrower promises to repay the principal plus interest. But what prevents them from defaulting? The lender faces the risk that the borrower, after receiving the funds, will simply disappear or refuse to pay. Traditional mechanisms like collateral, legal contracts, and reputational concerns serve as commitment devices, mechanisms that make the promise of repayment more credible. Yet, even these are imperfect. Collateral can depreciate, legal processes are costly and time-consuming, and reputation is a slow-building and easily damaged asset. The concept of commitment devices, therefore, occupies a central stage in the discourse surrounding credible threats and promises. It represents the active and often strategic manipulation of incentives to ensure future behaviors align with announced intentions. A credible threat means I am committed to doing something if you do something I don't like. A credible promise implies if you do what I want, I am bound to reward you. Now, let us gently wade into the realm of blockchain and smart contracts. A blockchain, at its heart, is a distributed, immutable ledger. Information recorded on the blockchain is verifiable by anyone, resistant to tampering, and inherently transparent. Smart contracts are, in essence, self-executing contracts written in code and deployed on a blockchain. These contracts automatically execute their terms when predefined conditions are met. Imagine a farmer who wants to purchase crop insurance. Traditionally, this involves a complex process of assessment, negotiation, and claims adjudication, all susceptible to delays, disputes, and information asymmetries. With a blockchain-based smart contract, however, the process can be significantly streamlined. The contract could be programmed to automatically trigger a payout if weather data from a trusted source indicates that rainfall levels have fallen below a certain threshold. The farmer receives their insurance payout promptly and transparently, without the need for lengthy bureaucratic procedures. The insurance provider has reduced its risk of fraudulent claims because the triggering data is coming from a trusted, immutable source. Herein lies the potential of smart contracts as powerful commitment devices. Because the code is publicly auditable and execution is automatic, the promise embedded within the contract becomes much more credible. The temptation to renege on a commitment, to manipulate the outcome, is significantly reduced. Think of it as replacing a handshake agreement, easily broken, with a robotic arm that is programmed to act without bias or emotion. This technology has profound implications for a wide range of economic activities. Supply chain management can be rendered more transparent and efficient, with smart contracts automating payments and verifying the authenticity of goods at each stage of the process. Decentralized finance applications can offer new and innovative financial services, removing the need for traditional intermediaries and fostering greater financial inclusion. Governance structures can be made more democratic and participatory, with blockchain-based voting systems ensuring secure and transparent elections. However, it's essential to acknowledge that smart contracts are not a panacea. The code must be carefully written and thoroughly audited to avoid bugs and vulnerabilities. Moreover, the real-world data that feeds into smart contracts must be reliable and trustworthy. The old adage of garbage in, garbage out applies with particular force in this context. And of course, regulatory frameworks are still evolving to address the unique challenges posed by blockchain technology. Despite these challenges, the potential of smart contracts to enhance trust, reduce transaction costs, and foster more efficient and equitable economic outcomes is undeniable. They represent a fascinating evolution in our ability to make credible commitments, moving from a world of trust-based systems to one where trust is, in many ways, embedded in the code itself. A shift, perhaps, from implicit to explicit guarantees. As we conclude, let us ponder a lingering question. If commitment devices embedded in code are fundamentally reshaping economic interactions, what are the new forms of agency and governance that will arise to manage this shifting landscape? What role will human discretion play in a world increasingly governed by algorithms? We shall delve into this in our next encounter. Chapter 28. Commitment in Business. Corporate governance and contracts. Last time, we considered the dance between information asymmetry and market efficiency. Now, we turn our attention to something even more profound: the crucial role of commitment in the architecture of economic transactions, particularly within the realms of corporate governance and contract law. Think of it as a deeper layer in the system, ensuring that promises made are promises kept, or at least that the incentives align to make keeping them the most rational choice. The concept revolves around commitment devices, mechanisms that allow individuals or organizations to credibly bind themselves to a future course of action, even if, at that future point, they might prefer to deviate. These devices are born from an understanding of our own fallibility, our potential for weakness when faced with temptation or shifting circumstances. They are the economic equivalent of Odysseus tying himself to the mast to resist the siren's song. Consider the fundamental agency problem inherent in corporate governance. Shareholders, as the owners of the corporation, delegate the management of their assets to executives. Ideally, these executives act in the best interests of the shareholders, maximizing the company's value. However, executives, being human, may be tempted to pursue their own interests, perhaps through empire building, excessive compensation, or simply shirking their responsibilities. This divergence of interests presents a classic commitment problem. To address this, a system of checks and balances, a delicate orchestration of incentives, is required. Boards of directors, elected by shareholders, are tasked with monitoring and overseeing management. Yet, boards themselves can be susceptible to capture, becoming too aligned with the executives they are supposed to supervise. This is where credible threats and promises come into play. A credible threat might take the form of a shareholder activist gaining a significant stake in the company and publicly threatening to launch a proxy battle if the board does not take steps to improve performance. The credibility of this threat hinges on the activist's reputation, resources, and the perceived likelihood of success. If the threat is deemed credible, it can effectively constrain management's behavior, forcing them to act more in line with shareholder interests. Conversely, a credible promise might involve aligning executive compensation with long-term shareholder value. This could mean granting stock options that only vest after several years, incentivizing executives to focus on sustainable growth rather than short-term gains. The promise is credible because the executive's own financial well-being is directly tied to the company's long-term success. This kind of incentive scheme aims to harmonize the executive's self-interest with the wider goals of the corporation. Contract law operates on similar principles. A contract, at its core, is a commitment device, an agreement between two or more parties to perform certain actions or refrain from performing others. The power of a contract lies in its enforceability. The threat of legal action, of financial penalties for breach of contract, provides a powerful incentive to honor the agreement. Without such enforcement mechanisms, contracts would be little more than empty promises, easily broken when circumstances change. Consider a long-term supply contract between a manufacturer and a supplier. The manufacturer commits to purchasing a certain quantity of raw materials from the supplier over a specified period, while the supplier commits to providing those materials at a predetermined price. This contract provides both parties with certainty, allowing them to plan their operations and investments accordingly. However, what happens if market conditions change dramatically? What if the price of raw materials plummets, making the contracted price significantly higher than the market price? The manufacturer might be tempted to breach the contract and purchase materials from a cheaper source. The effectiveness of the contract as a commitment device depends on the enforceability of its terms and the magnitude of the potential penalties for breach. If the contract is well written and the penalties for breach are substantial, the manufacturer is more likely to honor the agreement, even if it means paying a higher price. Conversely, if the contract is poorly drafted or the penalties are minimal, the manufacturer might be more inclined to take its chances in court. These commitment devices, whether embedded in corporate governance structures or enshrined in legally binding contracts, are the bedrock of a functioning market economy. They foster trust, encourage investment, and enable complex transactions that would otherwise be impossible. They are the silent architects of economic stability. But what happens when these commitment devices fail? What happens when individuals or organizations are able to circumvent the rules, to exploit loopholes, to break their promises with impunity? This leads us to a deeper consideration of ethical considerations and market regulation. Perhaps these failures provide a foundation for understanding the next economic phase. Chapter 29. Supply Chain Management. Building reliable partnerships, we've explored the optimization of resource allocation within our own firms. Now, let's expand our vision outward, tracing the delicate threads of the supply chain. The supply chain, in its essence, is an intricate network of interdependencies. But interdependence, while offering efficiency and specialization, also introduces vulnerability. It's here, in managing these vulnerabilities, that the principles of commitment devices become invaluable. Imagine a stream winding its way through the landscape. Each bend represents a supplier, a distributor, a retailer, all contributing to the flow of goods and services towards the end consumer. If one segment of this stream becomes blocked, the entire system suffers. The challenge, then, lies in creating a robust, reliable flow, in building trust that each participant will uphold their end of the bargain. Central to fostering this trust is the concept of commitment devices. These are mechanisms that allow one party to credibly commit to a particular course of action, often one that might not be optimal in the short term, but which benefits the long-term health of the relationship. Think of them as carefully calibrated levers, designed to align incentives and reduce the temptation to defect. Two key forms of commitment devices are credible threats and credible promises. Let's consider them in turn. A credible threat is a commitment to inflict harm on oneself, if a certain condition is violated by another party. The threat must be believable. It must be more costly to carry out the threat than to simply absorb the initial loss from the violation. This, at first glance, seems paradoxical. Why would anyone rationally commit to something that harms themselves? The answer lies in the future. The credible threat acts as a deterrent, preventing the violation from occurring in the first place. For example, a manufacturer might invest in specialized equipment that is only useful for producing goods for a particular supplier. By doing so, the manufacturer signals a strong commitment to the relationship. If the supplier attempts to renegotiate unfavorable terms, the manufacturer can credibly threaten to cease production, rendering the specialized equipment worthless. This self-imposed vulnerability, paradoxically, strengthens the manufacturer's bargaining position because it signals a long-term commitment. Now, consider a credible promise. This is a commitment to provide a benefit to another party if a certain condition is met. Similar to the credible threat, the promise must be believable. The party making the promise must have a demonstrable incentive to uphold it, even if it might be costly in the short run. Imagine a retailer promising to purchase a certain quantity of goods from a supplier, even if demand fluctuates. To make this promise credible, the retailer might invest in warehousing capacity specifically tailored to those goods. This investment acts as a signal of commitment, demonstrating that the retailer is serious about fulfilling their obligation. The supplier, in turn, is more likely to invest in the necessary production capacity, knowing that they have a guaranteed outlet for their products. The application of commitment devices within supply chain management requires careful consideration. It's a delicate balancing act. Too much commitment can lead to inflexibility, hindering the ability to adapt to changing market conditions. Too little commitment can breed distrust, undermining the stability of the entire network. The art lies in finding the optimal level of commitment, the point at which trust is maximized while retaining sufficient flexibility to navigate the ever-shifting economic landscape. The classical economist might view these arrangements with skepticism, focusing on the potential for inefficiency and market distortions. But the policymaker understands that in a complex, interconnected world, commitment devices can play a crucial role in fostering cooperation and building robust, resilient supply chains. These partnerships, however, are not static entities. They evolve, adapt, and sometimes dissolve. What factors, then, contribute to the longevity and adaptability of these committed relationships within the ever-churning currents of the global economy? That, perhaps, is a question for our next exploration. Marketing and branding. Creating customer loyalty. Tonight, we drift from the immediate act of purchase, considered in our previous discussion of behavioral economics, towards the longer-term landscape of customer relationships. We'll be exploring how marketing and branding, at their core, function as elaborate systems of commitment, mirroring the economic concepts of credible threats and promises. Consider them the soft power of the commercial world. The essence of a commitment device, you see, is pre-commitment. It's a conscious decision to restrict future options, to bind oneself to a particular course of action, even when future temptations arise. Think of Odysseus tying himself to the mast of his ship to resist the siren's song. He knowingly curtailed his freedom to ensure his survival and the success of his journey. In the economic realm, this manifests as credible threats and promises, signals intended to alter the behavior of others through strategically limiting one's own options. Now, let's translate this to marketing. A brand, particularly a well-established one, acts as a powerful commitment device. It's a promise made to the consumer, a promise of consistent quality, reliable service, and a specific experience. This promise isn't just a verbal declaration. It's backed by significant investment in research and development, in quality control, in advertising, and perhaps most importantly, in reputation. This investment represents the tying to the mast, the curtailment of future actions that could damage the brand's standing. Consider a luxury brand, for instance. The price point itself acts as a commitment. It's a signal to the consumer that the brand is committed to using high-quality materials and employing skilled craftsmanship. If the brand were to suddenly lower its prices and compromise on quality, it would be breaking its implicit promise, undermining the very foundation of its brand equity. The price acts as the credible promise, and the potential loss of reputation acts as the credible threat against deviation. However, commitment devices are not merely about maintaining the status quo. They can also be used to foster innovation and progress. A company that consistently invests in research and development is essentially committing itself to future improvements and new product offerings. This commitment can, in turn, attract loyal customers who value innovation and are willing to stay with the brand through successive iteration. The promise of future advancement, coupled with the threat of falling behind competitors if they stagnate, drives this cycle. Consider a subscription-based service. The recurring payments represent a commitment from the consumer, but also a reciprocal commitment from the company. The company is promising to continually provide value and maintain the quality of the service. If the service degrades, the consumer is likely to cancel their subscription, effectively enacting a punishment for the broken promise. This threat of churn keeps the company accountable and incentivizes them to uphold their end of the bargain. Marketing campaigns themselves often function as commitment devices. A limited-time offer, for example, creates a sense of urgency and encourages consumers to make a purchase. The limited time frame is the commitment. The company is signaling that the offer will not be available indefinitely, adding value to the purchase decision. This also allows the company to track engagement and refine its models over time, creating a feedback system to improve their strategy. The effectiveness of these commitment devices hinges on their credibility. A hollow promise, or a threat that lacks the power to be enacted, will ultimately fail. Consumers are astute and will quickly recognize insincerity. This is why authenticity and transparency are so crucial in modern marketing. Consumers demand to know what a brand stands for and are increasingly wary of companies that engage in deceptive practices. So, marketing and branding, when viewed through the lens of commitment devices, become far more than just promotional exercises. They represent sophisticated systems of promises and threats designed to build trust, foster loyalty, and ultimately create sustainable economic value. They are, in effect, the contractual bonds of the consumer society, softly, subtly, yet powerfully binding us to our choices. As we prepare to shift our focus towards game theory, I want you to consider this. How do these systems of credible threats and promises shift when we introduce multiple actors, each seeking to influence the other? The stage is set for strategic interaction, and the rules, my friends, are about to change. Chapter 31. Commitment in Politics. Campaign promises and policy implementation. Last time, we examined the somewhat turbulent waters of information asymmetry in economic models. Now let us navigate towards a related though distinct intellectual harbor: the application of commitment devices, credible threats and promises, within the realm of political economy. The distance from theory to application can feel vast, but trust that the underlying principles remain remarkably consistent. The concept of commitment in economics hinges on the ability to credibly bind oneself to a future course of action, even when deviating from that course might seem tempting at a later stage. Think of it as building a dam against the flood of short-term incentives that might otherwise erode long-term goals. This principle translates quite directly to the promises made during political campaigns and their subsequent implementation, or lack thereof, as policy. Consider, for instance, a politician campaigning on a platform of fiscal austerity. The electorate, weary of mounting national debt, finds this promise appealing. But once in office, the pressures to increase spending, responding to immediate crises, rewarding key constituencies, or simply boosting popularity before the next election, become immense. Without a credible commitment mechanism, the promise of austerity can easily dissolve, leaving the electorate feeling betrayed and eroding trust in the political system. So, what constitutes a credible commitment in the political sphere? It's not merely a matter of uttering the right words during a televised debate. It requires institutions, mechanisms, and perhaps even personal characteristics that make deviation from the promised course costly. One such mechanism might be legally binding budget rules, enshrined in law, that severely restrict the ability of the policymaker to overspend. Another could be the establishment of an independent central bank, shielded from political interference and tasked solely with maintaining price stability, a promise to future generations that inflation will be kept in check. Think of these institutions as gyroscopes, maintaining balance in the face of constant political forces. They introduce friction, slowing down impulsive actions and forcing a more deliberate, considered approach. This friction, while seemingly inefficient in the short term, can be invaluable in achieving long-term stability and predictability. The credibility of a promise also depends on the perceived cost to the policymaker of breaking it. Reputation, for example, is a powerful commitment device. A politician known for keeping their word, even when it's difficult, is more likely to be trusted in the future, and consequently, to be more effective in office. Conversely, a track record of broken promises can irrevocably damage a politician's credibility, making it nearly impossible to build consensus or implement meaningful reforms. However, the situation is rarely so straightforward. The classical economist might argue that voters are rational actors who will perfectly discount campaign promises, knowing that politicians have incentives to deviate. This leads to a situation where campaign promises become mere signaling devices, conveying information about the policymaker's type, their underlying values and priorities, rather than binding commitments to specific policies. Furthermore, even the most robust commitment devices can be circumvented. Legal loopholes can be exploited, budgets can be creatively manipulated, and the long arm of political pressure can still reach even the most independent institutions. The art of political compromise, while often necessary for effective governance, can also serve as a convenient excuse for abandoning campaign promises. Therefore, understanding commitment in politics requires a nuanced appreciation of the interplay between institutions, incentives, and information. It's a constant dance between the promised and the actual, between the ideals of the campaign trail and the realities of governing. It's a system in constant flux, seeking equilibrium, but never quite achieving it. And as we consider these devices of commitment and the challenges of credible policy implementation, a question arises, a question that will guide our next exploration. How does the temporal dimension, the passage of time, and the anticipation of future events further complicate the economic landscape and influence decision-making today? Think on that, and drift gently into rest. Chapter 32. International Relations. Treaties and Alliances. Tonight, we turn our attention to the grand stage of international relations, a domain governed by a complex interplay of national interests, aspirations, and anxieties. We leave behind, for the moment, the micro-level dynamics of individual markets and enter a world of sovereign states, each seeking to navigate the currents of global economics and power. Our focus, however, will remain firmly rooted in the principles we've established, specifically the concept of commitment devices and how they manifest as credible threats and promises in the arena of treaties and alliances. Think of the international system as a delicate ecosystem, a vast network of interconnected actors, striving for stability, prosperity, and security. In this ecosystem, treaties and alliances serve as vital binding agents, akin to carefully engineered regulatory mechanisms within a complex biological system. They are, at their core, commitment devices designed to overcome the inherent challenges of cooperation in an environment characterized by sovereign autonomy and the potential for defection. The problem, elegantly simple yet profoundly consequential, lies in the time inconsistency of national interests. What appears optimal today, adhering to the terms of a treaty, might be subverted tomorrow by shifting political winds, economic pressures, or evolving strategic priorities. A promise, however solemnly declared, is only as good as the perceived incentive to keep it. Therefore, for a treaty or alliance to be truly effective, it must incorporate mechanisms that render defection prohibitively costly, thereby making adherence the rationally preferred choice, even when the immediate temptation to deviate arises. This is where the concepts of credible threats and promises become paramount. A credible threat is a commitment to undertake actions detrimental to another party, should they violate the terms of an agreement. Consider a trade agreement that stipulates retaliatory tariffs should one nation engage in unfair trade practices. The effectiveness of this threat hinges on its credibility. Is the threatened nation actually willing to impose those tariffs, even if doing so incurs some cost to itself? If the threat is deemed hollow, perhaps because the cost of retaliation is too high, or the political will is lacking, then the agreement is weakened and the incentive to cheat is amplified. Conversely, a credible promise offers benefits to another party contingent upon their compliance with an agreement. Think of security alliances, where nations pledge mutual defense in the event of external aggression. The credibility of this promise rests on the willingness and ability of the allied nations to fulfill their commitment. Doubts about resolve or military capacity will erode the alliance's deterrent effect, potentially emboldening aggressors. The promise must be demonstrable, verifiable, and unwavering. Building credibility is a continuous process, requiring consistent signaling and demonstrable action. Nations might engage in costly signaling, such as military exercises or deployments, to underscore their commitment to a particular alliance. They might embed reciprocal monitoring mechanisms within treaties to verify compliance and detect violations. The classical economist understood this implicitly, though perhaps not in the language we use today. He emphasized the importance of clear contracts and enforceable property rights as foundational pillars of a functioning market. Treaties and alliances, in a sense, represent extensions of these principles to the international realm. However, the construction of credible commitments is rarely straightforward. The policymaker must contend with domestic political constraints, bureaucratic inertia, and the ever-present risk of miscalculation. What one nation perceives as a credible deterrent, another might interpret as an act of aggression, potentially triggering unintended escalation. Furthermore, the landscape of international relations is constantly shifting, requiring constant reassessment of the credibility of existing commitments and the formulation of new strategies. Consider, for instance, the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The threat of mutually assured destruction represents the ultimate and terrifying commitment device. Yet, the credibility of this threat depends on a delicate balance of rationality, communication, and safeguards against accidental war. Any perceived erosion of this credibility can destabilize the entire system. As we close this chapter, let us consider a final thought. The success of treaties and alliances, as commitment devices, hinges not only on the strength of the incentives they create, but also on the underlying trust and shared values that bind nations together. In the absence of trust, even the most meticulously crafted agreement can crumble under the weight of suspicion and self-interest. The effectiveness of these international structures, so essential for a functioning global economy, rests on the delicate interplay between rational self-interest and mutual understanding. We have examined the mechanics of these arrangements. But what are the underlying forces? Cultural, historical, psychological, that shape the very foundations of international trust and cooperation. That, perhaps, is a question for another evening, another exploration. The commitment problem in environmental policy. Welcome back. Last time, we explored the often invisible hand of incentives shaping individual environmental choices. Now, let us turn our attention to a broader canvas: the persistent challenge of commitment in environmental policy. It is one thing to understand the optimal path. It is quite another to credibly commit to staying on it, year after year, election cycle after election cycle. Consider the plight of the policymaker. They understand that a stringent environmental regulation today will yield significant benefits tomorrow: cleaner air, healthier ecosystems, a more sustainable future. Yet, they also face immediate pressures. Industries complain about compliance costs. Voters worry about job losses. The temptation to relax regulations, to postpone the pain, is ever present. This, my friends, is the essence of the commitment problem. It arises when a party, in this case the government, cannot credibly bind itself to future actions that are in the long-term best interest of everyone. The future benefits of environmental protection are diffuse and distant, while the costs are concentrated and immediate. This imbalance creates a powerful incentive to renege on promises, to weaken regulations, to prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. Economists have long grappled with the concept of credible threats and promises, often referred to as commitment devices. These are mechanisms that align incentives over time, making it costly to deviate from a predetermined course of action. They are the anchors that prevent drifting in turbulent waters. One approach involves enshrining environmental commitments in international treaties. These agreements, painstakingly negotiated and ratified, create legal and political obligations that are difficult to ignore. However, treaties are only as strong as the willingness of nations to abide by them. The absence of a global enforcement mechanism means that countries can, and sometimes do, withdraw from these agreements, undermining their effectiveness. It's akin to building a beautiful dam, only to discover that the river is free to carve a new path around it. Another strategy involves creating independent environmental agencies, insulated from political interference. These agencies, staffed by experts and guided by scientific principles, can serve as guardians of environmental regulations, ensuring that they are consistently enforced, regardless of short-term political pressures. The idea is to establish a system of checks and balances, preventing any single actor from unilaterally altering course. They are the steady hand on the rudder, correcting for the winds of political change. A third approach involves using market-based mechanisms, such as carbon taxes or cap-and-trade systems. These mechanisms create a financial incentive for businesses to reduce their environmental impact. Once these systems are in place, it becomes more costly for governments to weaken them, as doing so would disrupt markets and undermine business confidence. The incentive is woven directly into the fabric of the economic system, making it self-sustaining. They are the gears that turn smoothly, generating progress automatically. However, even the most carefully designed commitment device is not foolproof. The commitment problem is a persistent challenge, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. Technologies change, economies evolve, and political landscapes shift. What works today may not work tomorrow. Consider the rise of populism. This political phenomenon, characterized by skepticism towards established institutions and a desire for quick fixes, can pose a serious threat to environmental commitments. Populist leaders, often motivated by short-term political gains, may be tempted to weaken regulations, withdraw from international agreements, and dismantle independent environmental agencies. It is the sudden storm that threatens to break the anchor. Ultimately, overcoming the commitment problem in environmental policy requires a multifaceted approach. It requires strong institutions, transparent governance, informed public discourse, and a deep understanding of the economic incentives that shape environmental behavior. It requires a collective commitment to the long-term well-being of our planet. But perhaps the most fundamental challenge lies in fostering a sense of intergenerational responsibility. We must recognize that our actions today will have profound consequences for future generations. We must be willing to make sacrifices today to ensure a sustainable future for our children and grandchildren. This is not merely an economic problem, it is a moral one. And so, as we conclude this exploration of commitment in environmental policy, consider this. How can we cultivate a stronger sense of intergenerational responsibility, ensuring that our commitment to environmental sustainability endures, not just for years, but for generations to come? This question, my friends, will lead us to our next exploration of behavioral economics and the power of narrative. Education and human capital, investing in the future. We've explored the currents of human capital, recognizing education as a potent catalyst for economic advancement. Now, let us consider the subtler instruments within this grand design, the commitment devices that shape our choices and ensure that promises, both spoken and unspoken, hold firm. Commitment, in its purest form, is the act of binding oneself to a future course of action. In the realm of economics, these bindings are rarely forged in solitude. They exist within a web of expectations, incentives, and consequences. Commitment devices are the mechanisms that help us navigate this web, transforming fleeting intentions into concrete realities. They address the perennial struggle between our present desires and our long-term aspirations. Consider the student diligently saving for university. The initial impulse might be to spend freely, to indulge in immediate gratification. However, the promise of a brighter future, fueled by education, motivates restraint. Yet, this promise alone might falter in the face of temptation. Here is where commitment devices enter the stage. The student might create a savings account with penalties for early withdrawal, effectively making it harder to deviate from their goal. The act of locking away funds serves as a tangible commitment, reinforcing the aspiration of higher education. Credible threats and promises lie at the heart of these devices. A credible threat is a commitment to inflict a cost on oneself or another, should a specific condition be violated. Think of a parent who promises to withhold privileges if a child's grades fall below a certain level. The threat is credible only if the parent is willing to follow through, even when it becomes personally inconvenient. Without this willingness, the threat becomes empty, and its effectiveness wanes. Similarly, a credible promise is a pledge to provide a benefit upon the fulfillment of a specific condition. A scholarship, for example, is a credible promise of financial support contingent upon academic achievement. Its credibility stems from the institution's reputation and its established history of honoring such commitments. The policymaker often grapples with the challenges of crafting credible commitments. Consider the promise of government funding for research and development. To ensure that this promise translates into meaningful innovation, the policymaker must design mechanisms that prevent the funds from being diverted or misused. This may involve rigorous oversight, performance-based funding, and independent audits. Without these safeguards, the promise loses its luster, and the potential benefits of innovation are diminished. The classical economist might argue that individuals are inherently rational and capable of making optimal choices without the need for external constraints. However, behavioral economics reveals that human behavior is often influenced by biases, emotions, and cognitive limitations. Commitment devices offer a way to overcome these limitations, aligning our actions with our intentions. Furthermore, the effectiveness of commitment devices is contingent upon their design. A poorly designed device can backfire, creating unintended consequences. For example, a student loan program with overly burdensome repayment terms might discourage individuals from pursuing higher education, negating the very purpose of the program. The optimal design of commitment devices requires a deep understanding of human behavior and the specific context in which they are deployed. In the context of education, commitment devices can take many forms: mandatory attendance policies, tuition prepayment plans, mentoring programs, and even public pledges to achieve certain academic milestones. Each of these devices serves to reinforce the commitment to learning, increasing the likelihood of success. The flow of human capital is not merely about accumulating knowledge and skills. It is about creating an environment where individuals can make informed choices and commit to long-term investments in their own development. Commitment devices are the silent architects of this environment, shaping the landscape of opportunity and ensuring that promises of a brighter future are not mere illusions. As we consider the interplay of education, human capital, and these delicate instruments of commitment, we are left to ponder the next phase. How does society calibrate these devices to foster both individual agency and collective prosperity, ensuring the benefits of education are accessible to all, regardless of their circumstances? Chapter 35. Healthcare and Public Health. Promoting healthy behaviors, a gentle settling of thoughts. Remember our discussion of information asymmetry. The doctor knows more than the patient. Now, imagine that asymmetry amplified by the complexities of human behavior itself. We know we should eat well and exercise, yet the siren song of instant gratification often leads us astray. Tonight, we explore how economics conceptualizes and attempts to correct these self-defeating tendencies, focusing on the intriguing notion of commitment devices. Our journey begins with a simple observation. Human beings are often remarkably bad at predicting their future self. We make grand pronouncements about our dedication to healthy habits, only to find those resolutions crumbling under the weight of daily temptations. The classical economist, initially baffled by such inconsistencies, might have dismissed them as irrational. But modern behavioral economics offers a more nuanced perspective, recognizing that our preferences can be fluid and context-dependent. This is where commitment devices enter the stage. Think of commitment devices as self-imposed constraints, strategically designed to align our future actions with our present intentions. They transform the landscape of choices, making it more difficult, or even impossible, to deviate from our desired path. A credible threat, as the name suggests, levies a penalty for undesirable behavior. Imagine a weight loss program that requires participants to deposit a sum of money, which is forfeited if they fail to meet their weight goals. The potential loss serves as a powerful deterrent, nudging them towards healthier choices. Conversely, a credible promise offers a reward for desirable behavior. Consider a health insurance plan that provides discounts on premiums for individuals who consistently engage in preventative care, such as regular checkups and screenings. The prospect of financial savings acts as an incentive, encouraging adherence to recommended health guidelines. The success of both threats and promises rests on credibility. The consequences must be real, consistently applied, and large enough to outweigh the immediate gratification of unhealthy choices. A limp threat or a paltry reward will simply be ignored. However, the ethical implications of commitment devices cannot be overlooked. The policymaker must tread carefully, ensuring that these mechanisms do not disproportionately burden vulnerable populations. For example, a financial penalty for missed doctor's appointments might seem reasonable, but it could exacerbate existing inequalities if it prevents low-income individuals from accessing necessary care. Similarly, while incentivizing healthy behaviors through rewards can be effective, it's crucial to avoid creating a system where access to essential healthcare is contingent on adhering to a particular lifestyle. There must be a balance between encouraging responsible choices and safeguarding equitable access. Furthermore, the effectiveness of commitment devices often depends on individual preferences and contexts. What works for one person may not work for another. Some individuals might be highly motivated by the fear of losing money, while others might respond better to positive reinforcement. Understanding these nuances is crucial for designing effective and equitable public health interventions. Consider the use of nudges, subtle changes in the environment that influence behavior without restricting freedom of choice. Placing healthier food options at eye level in cafeterias, for example, or automatically enrolling employees in retirement savings plans, are both examples of nudges that can promote positive outcomes. The application of commitment devices in healthcare extends beyond individual behavior change. They can also be used to address systemic challenges. For instance, hospitals might be penalized for high rates of hospital-acquired infections, creating a strong incentive to improve infection control protocols. Similarly, insurance companies could be rewarded for promoting preventative care and reducing the overall cost of healthcare. These system-level interventions can have a ripple effect, fostering a culture of accountability and continuous improvement throughout the healthcare system. In conclusion, commitment devices, both threats and promises, offer a powerful framework for understanding and influencing human behavior in healthcare. They represent a departure from the simplistic assumptions of rational choice theory, acknowledging the complexities of human motivation and the challenges of self-control. But their implementation requires careful consideration of ethical implications, individual preferences, and systemic factors. The policymaker must strive for a delicate balance, promoting healthy behaviors without compromising equity or individual autonomy. As we consider these commitment devices, one might ask, are there intrinsic limitations to how much external forces can dictate our inner choices? Do we risk eroding personal agency by relying too heavily on such mechanisms? And how might evolving technologies, like personalized medicine and AI-driven health coaching, reshape the future of commitment devices in economics? These questions linger, awaiting exploration in our next economic journey. Chapter 36. Commitment in Criminal Justice, Deterrence and Rehabilitation. Good evening. Tonight, we delve into the application of economic principles, specifically the concept of commitment devices, within the context of criminal justice. These devices, in essence, represent attempts to make threats and promises credible, thereby altering behavior through the manipulation of future consequences. Consider a delicate dance between deterrence and rehabilitation, each striving to steer individuals away from harmful paths. The cornerstone of many criminal justice systems lies in deterrence. The goal is simple: to discourage criminal activity by imposing costs, be they fines, imprisonment, or social stigma, that outweigh the perceived benefits. This echoes the classical economist's vision of individuals as rational actors, meticulously weighing the costs and rewards of their actions. However, the effectiveness of deterrence hinges crucially on the credibility of the threat. A threat of punishment, no matter how severe, is toothless if it is perceived as unlikely to be enforced. This is where commitment devices enter the stage. They are mechanisms designed to enhance the credibility of the threat. Mandatory minimum sentencing laws, for instance, represent an attempt to bind the hands of judges, preventing them from offering leniency even in circumstances where mitigating factors might be present. The intention is to signal a firm and unwavering commitment to punishing specific offenses, thereby raising the perceived cost of engaging in those activities. Think of it as a dam, solid and unyielding, holding back the tide of potential crime. However, the application of commitment devices in deterrence is not without its complexities. Overly rigid sentencing guidelines can lead to unjust outcomes, disproportionately affecting certain demographics and failing to account for the nuances of individual cases. This can, in turn, erode public trust in the justice system, undermining its legitimacy and ultimately reducing its effectiveness. The dam, if built too high and without proper consideration for the surrounding ecosystem, can cause unforeseen and detrimental consequences. Beyond deterrence, the principle of commitment devices also finds relevance in the realm of rehabilitation. Here, the focus shifts from threatening punishment to promising a better future. Rehabilitation programs, drug treatment initiatives, and job training schemes can be viewed as commitment devices aimed at incentivizing individuals to desist from criminal activity and reintegrate into society. These programs offer a credible promise of improved opportunities and a path toward a more fulfilling life, contingent upon the individual's commitment to change. The effectiveness of these rehabilitative commitment devices hinges on their ability to convince individuals that the promised rewards are both attainable and sustainable. A program that offers only fleeting or inadequate support is unlikely to inspire lasting change. Instead, it must provide a pathway to genuine economic and social inclusion, offering individuals a tangible stake in a law-abiding life. Imagine a carefully constructed bridge, leading from a life of crime to a future of opportunity, each brick representing a step towards stability and belonging. The policymaker navigating the intricate landscape of criminal justice must carefully consider the interplay between deterrence and rehabilitation, recognizing that both are essential components of a well-functioning system. The challenge lies in crafting commitment devices that are both credible and just, effectively deterring criminal activity while simultaneously offering individuals a genuine opportunity to turn their lives around. It is a delicate balancing act, requiring a deep understanding of human behavior and a commitment to creating a society that is both safe and fair. As we contemplate these applications of economic thought to the complex issues of crime and punishment, one might naturally wonder, how does the structure of criminal justice systems themselves interact with the incentives faced by those within the system, law enforcement, legal professionals, and those accused of crimes? This is a question that will guide our explorations in the next phase. Chapter 37. The Ethics of Commitment Devices, Manipulation versus Empowerment. Last time, we explored how individuals often grapple with a tension between their present selves, driven by immediate desires, and their future selves, aiming for long-term goals. This inherent conflict gives rise to the need, and indeed the ingenuity, of commitment devices. Tonight, we turn a more critical eye towards these devices, examining their ethical dimensions. Are they tools of empowerment, helping us navigate our inherent weaknesses? Or do they represent a form of self-manipulation, a Faustian bargain struck with our own desires? The essence of a commitment device, as we've discussed, lies in restricting future choices to achieve a desired outcome. Think of Ulysses binding himself to the mast to resist the siren's song. He knowingly sacrificed his freedom of choice in the moment to safeguard his long-term objective: safe passage home. This act, viewed through an ethical lens, presents a fascinating duality. On one hand, it exemplifies rational self-governance. Ulysses recognized his vulnerability and proactively shielded himself from it. He acted in his own best interest, albeit through a constraint. On the other hand, consider the inherent coercion involved. Ulysses wasn't free to change his mind once the ropes were tied. The commitment device operated by effectively removing certain options from his future self's repertoire. This raises the specter of manipulation. Is it ethically permissible to preemptively curtail our own autonomy, even if we believe it serves a greater good? The ethical landscape becomes even more intricate when we consider external commitment devices, those imposed by others. Imagine a parent setting strict screen time limits for their child, or a community enacting laws to discourage unhealthy behaviors. Here, the question shifts from self-manipulation to the manipulation of others. The justification often rests on paternalism, the belief that individuals, particularly children or those deemed vulnerable, may not always act in their own best interests, and therefore require guidance, or even coercion, from a more informed party. The classical economist, often skeptical of paternalism, would argue that individuals are the best judges of their own welfare. Any external intervention, no matter how well-intentioned, risks distorting individual preferences and hindering the pursuit of utility. The inherent risk, they might argue, is a slippery slope toward authoritarianism, where individual autonomy is sacrificed in the name of a supposedly greater good. However, proponents of commitment devices emphasize the role of cognitive biases and self-control problems. We are, after all, imperfectly rational beings, prone to impulsivity, procrastination, and a host of other cognitive failings. Commitment devices, they argue, serve as a counterbalance to these inherent weaknesses, enabling us to achieve goals that would otherwise remain unattainable. A well-designed commitment device can act as a scaffold, providing temporary support as we build new habits and strengthen our self-discipline. The policymaker, grappling with the complexities of the real world, often seeks to strike a delicate balance between individual autonomy and collective well-being. They must weigh the potential benefits of commitment devices against the risks of coercion and unintended consequences. One crucial factor is transparency. A commitment device is far more ethically defensible if individuals are fully informed about its workings and have the option to opt out. This principle of informed consent is paramount in safeguarding individual autonomy. Furthermore, the design of commitment devices should be carefully considered. Are they overly restrictive? Do they allow for flexibility and adaptation as circumstances change? A rigid commitment device, insensitive to individual needs and preferences, is more likely to be perceived as manipulative rather than empowering. The ideal commitment device, then, is one that provides gentle guidance and support rather than heavy-handed control. Ultimately, the ethics of commitment devices hinges on the delicate interplay between manipulation and empowerment. There is no simple answer, no universal formula. Each situation must be assessed on its own merits, taking into account the specific context, the individuals involved, and the potential consequences. The key is to strive for a balance, a system where commitment devices serve as tools for self-improvement and societal betterment, without unduly infringing upon individual autonomy and freedom of choice. As we move towards understanding the broader societal impact of these individual choices, we might ask ourselves, where does the responsibility of individual action end and the obligation of collective governance begin? Cultural variations in commitment norms. Good evening. We've been exploring the fascinating world of commitment devices, those ingenious mechanisms individuals employ to bind themselves to future actions. We've seen how they can bolster willpower, overcome procrastination, and ultimately align our short-term impulses with our long-term goals. Now, let's gently steer our minds towards a crucial, often overlooked dimension: the influence of culture on the very fabric of commitment. Imagine commitment not as a solitary act of self-discipline, but as a social contract, subtly shaped by the norms and expectations of the society in which we live. The effectiveness of a commitment device, that credible threat or promise, isn't solely determined by its inherent structure. It's also profoundly influenced by the cultural context in which it's deployed. A vow made in one culture might carry immense weight, while in another, it might be seen as more of a suggestion. Consider, for instance, the concept of honor. In some societies, maintaining one's reputation and upholding one's word are paramount. A promise made, even informally, is a sacred obligation. In such settings, even a simple pledge, publicly declared, can function as a powerful commitment device. The fear of social ostracism, the erosion of trust, acts as the credible threat that ensures adherence. The policymaker in such a culture might leverage this inherent sense of honor to implement policies that rely on voluntary compliance, knowing that the social cost of reneging is high. Conversely, in societies where individualism is prized above all else and social bonds are looser, the power of reputational concerns might be diminished. The classical economist, observing this, might note that the effectiveness of commitment devices based on social pressure will likely be less pronounced. In such a cultural landscape, more formal, legally binding agreements or self-imposed financial penalties might be necessary to achieve the desired outcome. Furthermore, perceptions of fairness and reciprocity vary across cultures, directly impacting the credibility of promises. A promise of future cooperation, for instance, might be viewed with skepticism in a society where past interactions have been characterized by exploitation or distrust. The perceived fairness of the initial agreement and the expectation that all parties will uphold their end of the bargain are critical factors in establishing the necessary trust for a commitment device to function effectively. Think of the delicate balance between individual autonomy and collective responsibility. Some cultures emphasize the importance of individual choice and self-reliance. In these settings, commitment devices that appear overly restrictive or coercive might be met with resistance. On the other hand, cultures that place a higher value on collective well-being and social harmony might be more receptive to commitment devices that promote cooperation and discourage self-serving behavior. Even the perception of time influences commitment. Cultures with a long-term orientation, where planning for future generations is deeply ingrained, might find it easier to commit to long-term goals and strategies. Conversely, cultures with a more short-term focus might be more susceptible to immediate gratification and less willing to delay rewards, making commitment devices designed for long-term planning less effective. Language, too, plays a role. The very words we use to express commitment, the nuances of tone and gesture that accompany our promises, are all culturally mediated. A handshake might signify a binding agreement in one culture, while in another, it might be seen as a mere formality. The implications of these cultural variations are profound, particularly for international collaborations and policy design. A commitment device that works effectively in one cultural context might backfire spectacularly in another, leading to misunderstandings, resentment, and ultimately, the failure of the intended outcome. The policymaker crafting international agreements must therefore be acutely aware of these cultural nuances and tailor commitment mechanisms to align with the prevailing norms and expectations of each participating culture. As we begin to consider the next phase of economic action, let us then contemplate this. How might the increasing interconnectedness of the world, the blurring of cultural boundaries, further transform our understanding of commitment, blurring the lines between the individual and the collective, and shaping the future of cooperation and trust? Let us consider that and allow it to settle in our minds as we move forward. Good night. Chapter 39. The Future of Commitment. Emerging trends. Having explored the landscape of commitment devices through the lens of their inherent paradoxes, the freedom that arises from self-imposed constraints, we now turn our gaze towards the horizon. What emerging trends are shaping the future of credible threats and promises in the economic sphere? The very nature of commitment, like a river, is constantly being reshaped by the currents of technological and societal change. Let us consider these currents with a calm, analytical eye. One significant shift stems from the increasing digitization of our lives. The rise of blockchain technology, for instance, offers fertile ground for creating commitment mechanisms that are inherently transparent and immutable. Smart contracts, encoded agreements that automatically execute upon the fulfillment of predefined conditions, represent a powerful tool for enforcing promises with unparalleled credibility. Think of a farmer using a smart contract to secure a loan. The terms are transparently recorded on the blockchain, and repayment is automatically triggered by verifiable data, such as a successful harvest, minimizing the risk of default for both parties. This removes the ambiguity of interpersonal trust. Previously, the enforcement of commitments often relied on external institutions, courts, regulatory bodies, or even the implicit threat of social ostracism. Blockchain, however, allows for self-enforcing agreements, shifting the burden of enforcement from centralized authorities to decentralized networks. This has profound implications, particularly in contexts where trust in traditional institutions is weak or absent. In developing nations, for example, where property rights may be uncertain, blockchain-based land registries could offer a more secure and transparent means of establishing and enforcing ownership, thus fostering greater investment and economic activity. Another emerging trend is the application of behavioral economics to the design of more effective commitment devices. The classical economist often assumes that individuals are perfectly rational and self-controlled. Yet, in reality, we are often susceptible to temptation, procrastination, and cognitive biases. Recognizing these limitations, behavioral economists have developed a range of interventions designed to help us overcome our self-control problems. Consider the concept of pre-commitment. It acknowledges our future selves will have competing priorities, and we may need help staying true to our original goals. Apps and platforms can be designed to facilitate pre-commitment. For instance, a fitness app might allow users to pledge a certain amount of money to a charity they dislike if they fail to meet their exercise goals. The pain of donating to an opposing cause acts as a potent incentive to adhere to their commitment. This leveraging of aversion therapy underscores the ingenuity of behavioral economics in crafting more robust commitment mechanisms. Furthermore, the increasing sophistication of artificial intelligence and machine learning offers exciting possibilities for personalizing commitment devices. AI algorithms can analyze individual behavioral patterns to identify specific triggers for self-control failures, and then tailor interventions accordingly. An AI-powered financial advisor, for example, could detect when a client is likely to overspend and then automatically transfer funds to a savings account, thereby reinforcing the commitment to long-term financial goals. This personalized approach promises to be far more effective than one-size-fits-all solution. However, these emerging trends also raise important ethical considerations. The potential for coercion and manipulation is a genuine concern. The policymaker must tread carefully to ensure that commitment devices are used to empower individuals, not to exploit their vulnerabilities. Transparency and informed consent are paramount. Individuals must fully understand the implications of entering into a commitment agreement and have the freedom to exit the arrangement if they so choose. The balance between promoting individual welfare and safeguarding individual autonomy is a delicate one. Moreover, the reliance on technology raises questions about accessibility and equity. If access to sophisticated commitment devices is limited to those who are technologically savvy and financially secure, it could exacerbate existing inequalities. Efforts must be made to ensure that the benefits of these innovations are widely distributed. As we journey forward, it is clear that the future of commitment is inextricably linked to the evolving landscape of technology and behavioral science. The rivers of innovation flow ever onward, carrying with them both opportunities and challenges. The task before us is to navigate these waters with wisdom and foresight, ensuring that commitment devices serve as tools for empowerment, not instruments of control. But as we create increasingly complex self-binding contracts, will we eventually find ourselves trapped in golden cages of our own making? This question, perhaps, is a fitting prelude to our next exploration. Criticisms of commitment theory. Limits and biases. Having gently navigated the waters of commitment devices, discerning their forms and function, we now find ourselves at a crucial juncture. Like cartographers charting uncharted territories, we must also acknowledge the potential pitfalls and limitations of the map we are creating. Tonight, we will consider some significant criticisms leveled against the theory of commitment devices, exploring its boundaries and inherent biases. Let us proceed with quiet deliberation. One primary criticism arises from the assumption of perfect rationality, a cornerstone upon which many economic models are built. The idealized individual, envisioned by the classical economist, possesses flawless foresight and unwavering self-control, capable of perfectly calculating the optimal commitment device. However, real human beings are far more prone to cognitive biases, emotional impulses, and imperfect information. Consider the individual attempting to quit smoking. While a commitment device, say, Donating a large sum to a disliked political organization upon failure might seem effective in theory. Its success hinges on the individual's accurate prediction of their future self. If the craving proves unexpectedly strong, the commitment device may simply be overridden, rendering it ineffective and potentially even counterproductive, fostering resentment rather than reinforcing desired behavior. The internal negotiation is rarely as straightforward as our models suggest. Furthermore, the effectiveness of commitment devices is often contingent upon the credibility of the threat or promise. A threat lacking believability is akin to a ship without sails, unable to navigate the turbulent seas of temptation. The policymaker, for example, might announce a stringent environmental regulation, a seemingly powerful commitment to sustainability. However, if the resources allocated for enforcement are insufficient, or if the political will to withstand industry lobbying wanes, the commitment becomes hollow, eroding trust and potentially encouraging non-compliance. The scales of justice must be demonstrably balanced for the deterrent to truly weigh. Another line of critique focuses on the potential for unintended consequences. Like a dam built to control a river, commitment devices can sometimes disrupt the natural flow of events in unforeseen ways. A company, for example, might commit to a rigid pricing strategy to signal stability to investors. However, this commitment could limit their flexibility in responding to unexpected market fluctuations, potentially hindering their ability to compete effectively. The pursuit of certainty can, paradoxically, introduce new forms of vulnerability. The question of access also deserves scrutiny. Commitment devices are not universally available or affordable. Financial instruments, for instance, often require a certain level of financial literacy and resources, creating a potential disparity between those who can effectively manage their future selves and those who cannot. This raises concerns about equity and social justice. If commitment devices are disproportionately accessible to the privileged, they may exacerbate existing inequalities, rather than promoting overall well-being. The playing field, as ever, is not level. Furthermore, commitment theory often overlooks the social and cultural context in which decisions are made. A commitment device that is effective in one culture might be completely ineffective in another, due to differing social norms and values. For instance, a public commitment to charitable giving might be highly valued in a society that emphasizes altruism, but less effective in a society that prioritizes individual achievement. The cultural currents subtly shape our choices. Finally, there's the question of manipulation. Just as a skilled architect can design structures that guide our movement, so too can clever marketers design commitment devices that subtly influence our behavior in ways that may not be entirely in our best interest. Subscription models, for example, often rely on inertia and the fear of missing out to keep consumers locked into services they no longer actively use. The line between helpful commitment and subtle coercion can be blurry indeed. These criticisms, though potentially unsettling, are ultimately constructive. They remind us that commitment theory, like any economic model, is a simplification of a complex reality. By acknowledging its limitations and biases, we can refine our understanding of human behavior and develop more nuanced and effective strategies for promoting individual and societal well-being. As we conclude tonight, a lingering question remains. What ethical considerations arise when commitment devices are employed by governments or corporations on a large scale? The next chapter awaits, beckoning us towards further exploration of the ever-shifting economic landscape. Chapter 41. Commitment and moral responsibility. We spoke earlier of the limitations of purely rational action, of the ways in which the self-interest maxim, while a powerful engine for analysis, can sometimes lead us astray, or at least to less desirable outcomes than might otherwise be possible. Now, let us consider the delicate dance between intentions and actions, specifically how we navigate the treacherous waters of trust and cooperation. This brings us to the fascinating realm of commitment devices, tools, strategies, and even self-imposed limitations, designed to make our promises credible and our threats believable. Think of it as scaffolding built around our intentions, lending them the strength to withstand the winds of temptation. At the heart of commitment devices lies a fundamental problem: the potential for time inconsistency. What seems perfectly rational to promise today might appear utterly foolish to deliver tomorrow. Consider, for example, the individual who vows to save diligently for retirement. Today, the future benefits seem distant, abstract. The immediate gratification of a lavish purchase, however, is vividly present, intensely appealing. The temptation to abandon the savings plan, to succumb to the siren song of instant gratification, can be overwhelming. This is where commitment devices step in, acting as a self-imposed anchor against the tide of impulsivity. These devices manifest in many forms. The dieter, for instance, might commit to publicly posting their weight loss progress online, leveraging the potential embarrassment of failure to bolster their resolve. The smoker might pledge money to a cause they despise if they fail to quit, creating a tangible penalty for backsliding. The student might schedule regular study sessions with a tutor, making it more difficult to procrastinate. All these strategies share a common thread. They introduce an element of inflexibility, a pre-commitment to a course of action, thereby altering the incentives in a way that makes future defection less appealing. Crucially, the effectiveness of a commitment device hinges on its credibility. A threat, no matter how severe, is meaningless if it is not believable. A promise, however earnest, is worthless if it is not expected to be kept. Credibility, therefore, becomes the cornerstone of successful commitment. To make a threat credible, one must convincingly demonstrate a willingness to carry it out, even if doing so is costly. To make a promise credible, one must provide assurance that it will be honored, even when circumstances change. This is where reputation, repeated interactions, and the enforcement mechanisms of institutions come into play. Consider the case of international relations. A nation might threaten military retaliation in response to an act of aggression. However, the credibility of this threat depends on factors such as the nation's military capabilities, its past history of honoring its commitments, and the potential costs of war. A threat issued by a weak nation with a history of broken promises is unlikely to be taken seriously. Conversely, a threat issued by a powerful nation with a reputation for resolve is far more likely to deter aggression. The policymaker, understanding this dynamic, might invest heavily in military readiness and signal an unwavering commitment to defend its interests, thereby bolstering the credibility of its deterrent. The use of commitment devices also raises important ethical considerations. Are we morally responsible for actions undertaken under the influence of self-imposed constraints? Does the fact that we voluntarily chose to limit our future freedom excuse us from the consequences of those limitations? These are complex questions with no easy answers. The classical economist might argue that individuals are always free to choose, and that commitment devices are simply a rational strategy for achieving desired outcomes. Others might argue that such devices can undermine autonomy and lead to unforeseen consequences. Furthermore, the effectiveness of commitment devices can vary depending on individual characteristics and cultural norms. What works for one person might not work for another. Some individuals are more susceptible to social pressure, while others are more motivated by internal rewards. Cultural norms can also shape the effectiveness of commitment devices by influencing the perceived costs and benefits of compliance. A society that values honor and integrity is more likely to reward those who keep their promises and punish those who break them. In conclusion, commitment devices represent a fascinating intersection of economics, psychology, and ethics. They highlight the inherent tension between our short-term desires and our long-term goals, and they offer a range of strategies for bridging this gap. By understanding the principles of credibility and commitment, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of human behavior and the role of institutions in fostering cooperation and trust. But a question lingers as we consider these self-imposed limitations. How do we balance the benefits of pre-commitment with the flexibility needed to adapt to an ever-changing world? This is a question that will undoubtedly occupy our thoughts as we move forward. Chapter 42. The Paradox of Commitment, Freedom versus Constraint. Ah, yes. We were discussing, weren't we, the subtle dance between rational self-interest and its frequent miscalculations. Tonight, we delve into a related, perhaps even more perplexing area, the concept of commitment devices. Think of it as an attempt to bind ourselves, to willingly sacrifice future flexibility, for the sake of a longer-term goal. It is, At its heart, a paradox, seeking freedom through self-imposed constraint. Consider the Ulysses contract, a classic, if somewhat dramatic, example. Odysseus, knowing his weakness for the siren's song, ordered his men to tie him to the mast and to ignore his pleas for release. He recognized his future, potentially irrational self, and preemptively curtailed its power. This, in essence, is the core idea behind commitment devices, acknowledging our fallibility and proactively limiting our options. In the realm of economics, commitment devices take many forms. Think of a savings account that penalizes early withdrawals. The small, upfront discomfort of restricted access serves as a bulwark against the temptation to spend impulsively later. Or consider a gym membership with a lengthy contract. The sunk cost, the commitment to a series of payments, encourages regular attendance, even on days when motivation wanes. These are not merely limitations, they are tools. Tools to sculpt our future selves, to nudge us towards our desired outcomes. But the effectiveness of these devices hinges on credibility. A threat, to be effective, must be believed. A promise, to be relied upon, must be kept. This brings us to the concepts of credible threats and credible promises. A credible threat is one that the actor will carry out, even if it's not in their immediate self-interest at the moment of execution. It requires some mechanism to ensure follow-through, a reputation for consistency, or perhaps even a pre-commitment to a course of action that becomes irreversible after a certain point. Imagine a firm threatening to flood the market with product to deter a new competitor. This threat is only credible if the firm has invested in sufficient production capacity, or if its brand is strong enough to withstand a temporary price war. Without such pre-commitments, the threat rings hollow. The rational competitor will recognize the firm's incentive to ultimately avoid self-destructive price cuts and enter the market anyway. Similarly, a credible promise is one that the promiser has a vested interest in upholding. Consider a warranty on a product. The manufacturer promises to repair or replace defective items. This promise is credible because the manufacturer's reputation is at stake, and the long-term value of that reputation outweighs the cost of fulfilling occasional warranty claims. If the manufacturer were a fly-by-night operation with no stake in future sales, the promise would be far less believable. However, there's a delicate balance to be struck. Overly rigid commitment devices can be counterproductive. Life is, after all, unpredictable. Unforeseen circumstances may render a previously beneficial commitment detrimental. The rigid savings account, while safeguarding against impulsive spending, might also prevent access to funds in a genuine emergency. The long-term gym membership becomes a financial burden when injury prevents exercise. Thus, the skillful application of commitment devices requires a nuanced understanding of both our own weaknesses and the external environment. It's about finding the optimal level of constraint, a sweet spot between rigid inflexibility and unbounded impulsiveness. It's about creating systems that guide but don't imprison, that encourage but don't coerce. The classical economist, steeped in assumptions of perfect rationality, often struggles with the concept of commitment devices. They see any voluntary restriction of choice as inherently irrational. Why would a perfectly rational actor ever limit their future options? But the reality, as behavioral economics has so clearly demonstrated, is that we are not perfectly rational. We are prone to biases, to short-sightedness, to moments of weakness. And it is in these moments that commitment devices can prove invaluable. The policymaker, too, grapples with the paradox of commitment. Should governments impose restrictions on individual behavior to promote long-term well-being? Should they mandate retirement savings, restrict access to harmful substances, or regulate industries to prevent environmental damage? These are, in essence, attempts to use societal-level commitment devices to correct for collective failures of self-control. But the challenge lies in balancing the benefits of such interventions against the potential costs to individual liberty and economic efficiency. And so, we find ourselves contemplating this intricate dance between freedom and constraint. A dance where our very attempts to secure our future selves become, ironically, the shackles that bind us. Are there limits to how far we can, or should, restrict our future actions in the name of long-term benefit? And how do we ensure that these restrictions serve our true interests, rather than merely reflecting our present biases? A question for another night, perhaps, as we continue our exploration of the human condition, as reflected in the sometimes unpredictable mirror of economics. Chapter 43. Case Study. Commitment Strategies in a Specific Industry. Good evening. We've previously explored the fascinating realm of commitment devices, those ingenious mechanisms that allow us to bind ourselves to future actions, even when our present selves might be tempted to stray. Tonight, we'll delve into a concrete example, illustrating how these principles manifest within a specific industry: renewable energy development. Imagine, if you will, a landscape dotted not with smokestacks, but with solar panels and wind turbines, a landscape shaped by the need for long-term investment and unwavering dedication. Renewable energy, by its very nature, demands a long-term perspective. Unlike fossil fuels, which offer readily available, though ultimately finite, energy sources, renewables require significant upfront capital expenditure. Building a wind farm, constructing a solar plant, these are undertakings that necessitate substantial financial commitments, with returns often realized only years, even decades, into the future. This inherent characteristic creates a fertile ground for the application of commitment strategies. Consider, for instance, the role of government subsidies. A policymaker might announce a long-term feed-in tariff, guaranteeing a fixed price for electricity generated from renewable sources for, say, 20 years. This acts as a credible promise, encouraging private companies to invest in these technologies. The tariff provides a degree of certainty, mitigating the risks associated with volatile energy markets. The companies, in turn, commit to building and operating these facilities, knowing that their investment will be supported by a stable revenue stream. However, the credibility of such a promise is paramount. If investors believe the policymaker might renege on the agreement, perhaps succumbing to political pressure or shifting economic priorities, the investment will simply not materialize. This is where the design of the commitment device becomes crucial. The policymaker could, for example, enshrine the tariff in law, making it more difficult to alter. Alternatively, they could create a public-private partnership, sharing the financial burden and fostering a sense of shared responsibility. The key is to make the promise as unbreakable as possible. Now, let's consider the potential for credible threats. Imagine a scenario where a government mandates that a certain percentage of electricity must come from renewable sources by a specific date. This is a regulatory threat. The implicit threat is that those who fail to comply will face significant penalties, such as fines, or even the loss of operating licenses. This threat encourages energy companies to diversify their portfolios and invest in renewable energy projects, even if they might otherwise be hesitant to do so. The strength of the threat, of course, depends on the government's willingness to enforce the regulations consistently and impartially. Beyond government interventions, companies themselves can employ commitment strategies. A renewable energy company, for instance, might enter into long-term contracts with suppliers of solar panels or wind turbines. These contracts, in turn, represent a commitment to a specific technology and a particular scale of operation. They provide a degree of security to the suppliers, encouraging them to invest in their own production capacity. This creates a virtuous cycle, fostering growth and innovation within the renewable energy sector. It's not always a smooth stream, however. Commitment devices are often imperfect. Unforeseen circumstances, such as technological breakthroughs or dramatic shifts in the political landscape, can undermine their effectiveness. For example, a sudden drop in the price of natural gas might make renewable energy less competitive, despite the existence of feed-in tariffs. Similarly, a change in government ideology could lead to the repeal of supportive policies. The delicate balance between flexibility and commitment is a constant challenge in the design and implementation of these strategies. The classical economist might argue that commitment devices are unnecessary, even counterproductive. The market, they might contend, should be allowed to allocate resources efficiently, without artificial interventions. If renewable energy is truly viable, it will thrive on its own merits, without the need for subsidies or mandates. However, this perspective often overlooks the inherent externalities associated with fossil fuels, the environmental damage they inflict, the health problems they cause, the geopolitical instability they can fuel. Commitment devices in this context can be seen as a way to internalize these externalities, leveling the playing field and encouraging a more sustainable energy future. As we conclude, it becomes evident that commitment devices are not simply abstract theoretical constructs. They are practical tools that shape industries and influence investment decisions. But as technology evolves and the global energy landscape shifts, what new forms of commitment will become necessary to ensure a sustainable future? That, my friends, is a question for another night. Good night. Chapter 44. Expert Perspectives. Leading economists on commitment devices. Last time, we explored the theoretical underpinnings of commitment devices, seeing how they can bridge the gap between intention and action. Tonight, we delve deeper, seeking insight from those who have wrestled with these concepts in the real world. We will listen not for solutions, but for a deeper understanding of the subtle dance between rationality and self-control. The central question, of course, remains: how can we credibly bind ourselves to a future course of action when our present selves might prefer a different path? This is where the perspectives of leading economists provide valuable illumination. We are not simply memorizing formulas tonight. We are observing how seasoned thinkers have navigated this challenging intellectual terrain. Consider the perspective of the classical economists. Rooted in the principles of rational choice, this school of thought initially viewed commitment devices with a degree of skepticism. The prevailing wisdom suggested that rational actors should always be able to optimize their choices in each moment, making pre-commitment unnecessary, even irrational. However, practical observations began to challenge this assumption. The classical economist was forced to concede that, in many instances, individuals do, in fact, employ mechanisms to constrain their future choices, often with demonstrably positive results. The key shift came with the recognition that rationality itself can be bounded. Humans are not perfectly rational calculating machines. They are subject to cognitive biases, emotional impulses, and the inherent limitations of willpower. Thus, commitment devices emerge not as a rejection of rationality, but as a pragmatic response to its inherent imperfections. They are, in essence, a tool to manage our own internal inconsistencies, to reconcile our short-term desires with our long-term goals. Now, let us turn to the perspective of the behavioral economist. This viewpoint embraces the psychological nuances of decision-making, acknowledging the powerful influence of framing effects, loss aversion, and present bias. From this vantage point, commitment devices become not merely strategies, but necessities. They are the anchors that prevent us from drifting aimlessly in the turbulent waters of immediate gratification. The behavioral economist often points to examples like smoking cessation programs or weight loss challenges, where individuals voluntarily subject themselves to penalties for failing to meet predefined goals. These examples underscore the power of loss aversion, the tendency to feel the pain of losing something more acutely than the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. By structuring incentives in terms of potential losses, individuals are often more motivated to adhere to their commitments. The policymaker offers yet another crucial perspective. From the standpoint of public policy, commitment devices are not simply individual strategies, but potentially powerful tools for promoting social welfare. For example, automatic enrollment in retirement savings plans, with the option to opt out, leverages the power of inertia to encourage greater participation and improve financial security. Similarly, taxes on sugary drinks or tobacco products serve as a form of commitment device, nudging individuals toward healthier choices by increasing the cost of less desirable options. The policymaker understands that commitment devices can be particularly effective when they align individual incentives with broader societal goals. However, they also recognize the potential for unintended consequences and the ethical considerations that arise when governments intervene in individual decision-making. Transparency, informed consent, and the avoidance of paternalistic overreach are paramount. In essence, understanding commitment devices requires navigating a complex interplay of economic theory, behavioral psychology, and ethical considerations. The classical economist reminds us of the importance of rational incentives, The behavioral economist illuminates the psychological forces that shape our choices, and the policymaker grapples with the practical challenges of implementing these insights on a larger scale. All perspectives offer invaluable pieces to complete this complex puzzle. As we conclude our exploration of expert perspectives, we are left with a sense of the profound complexity of human behavior. Commitment devices are not a simple panacea, but rather a nuanced tool that can be used to bridge the gap between intention and action. But if commitment devices are designed to help us control our future selves, who controls the designers? Is the promise of greater individual or societal good enough reason to subtly alter the decision-making landscape? This, perhaps, is a question for another night. Conclusion: the enduring significance of commitment. We've traversed a landscape of rational actors, incentives carefully crafted, and the strategic deployment of commitment. From Ulysses lashing himself to the mast, a metaphor we touched upon earlier, to the intricate mechanisms of monetary policy, the principle of commitment has served as a guiding star. Now, as we reach the culmination of our exploration, let us reflect on the enduring significance of these commitment devices and their implications for the world of economics. Like the bedrock beneath a flowing river, the underlying assumption of rational self-interest remains foundational. Yet, as we've seen, unaided rationality can sometimes lead to suboptimal outcomes. The prisoner's dilemma, a recurring motif in our discourse, illustrates this perfectly. Each individual, acting in their own best interest, arrives at a result that is inferior to what could have been achieved through cooperation. This is where the power of commitment devices emerges, offering a path to bridge the gap between individual incentives and collective well-being. Consider, for instance, the role of contract law. It is, in essence, a commitment device. By entering into a legally binding agreement, parties credibly commit to fulfilling their obligations. This commitment, enforced by the threat of legal repercussions, fosters trust and facilitates economic exchange. Without such enforceable commitments, trade would be significantly hampered, reduced to interactions amongst only the most trusted parties. The globalized economy we know today rests, to a significant degree, on the reliability of international contracts and the commitment they represent. Similarly, reputation serves as a powerful commitment device in repeated interactions. A firm that consistently delivers high-quality goods builds a reputation for reliability, signaling a commitment to future quality. This commitment, born of self-interest, the desire to maintain a positive reputation and attract future customers, encourages responsible behavior. The threat of reputational damage acts as a potent deterrent against opportunistic behavior, ensuring a higher level of quality and service than would otherwise be observed. Moving beyond the realm of individual interactions, we find commitment devices playing a crucial role in macroeconomic policy. The policymaker, tasked with managing the economy, often faces the temptation of short-term gains at the expense of long-term stability. For example, the lure of stimulating the economy through inflationary monetary policy can be strong, especially in the lead-up to an election. However, such actions erode credibility and can lead to inflationary expectations, ultimately undermining the long-term health of the economy. To mitigate this risk, central banks often adopt commitment devices, such as inflation targeting. By publicly announcing a specific inflation target and committing to maintain it, they signal their resolve to resist inflationary pressures, thereby shaping expectations and fostering price stability. The effectiveness of these commitment devices, however, is not absolute. They are contingent upon the credibility of the commitment itself. A threat is only effective if it is believed to be real. A promise is only valuable if it is believed to be kept. This is where the design and implementation of commitment devices become critical. The more transparent and verifiable the commitment, the more credible it becomes. Independent central banks, for example, are often seen as more credible than those directly controlled by the government, as they are less susceptible to political pressures. Furthermore, the costs and benefits of commitment must be carefully weighed. Commitment can provide stability and predictability, but it can also limit flexibility in the face of unforeseen circumstances. A rigid commitment to a particular policy may prove detrimental if the underlying economic conditions change dramatically. Therefore, the optimal level of commitment is a delicate balance between the benefits of predictability and the need for adaptability. Even the classical economist, believing in the inherent self-correcting nature of markets, understood the need for some commitment mechanisms, particularly in establishing property rights. Secure property rights serve as a commitment by society to protect individuals' investments and innovations, thereby encouraging economic activity. This foundational commitment forms the basis of a market economy, providing the stability necessary for long-term growth. In conclusion, the concept of commitment devices provides a valuable lens through which to understand economic behavior. It highlights the importance of credibility, reputation, and the strategic use of self-imposed constraints in achieving desired outcomes. From individual interactions to macroeconomic policy, commitment devices shape our economic landscape, fostering trust, encouraging cooperation, and promoting stability. But as the world becomes ever more interconnected, and new technologies disrupt established norms, how will the very nature of commitment evolve? Will blockchain technology, for example, usher in a new era of decentralized, automated commitments? The answer, like the horizon itself, remains just out of reach, beckoning us onward to the next stage of economic understanding.